Chapter 125. Xiao Fan, have you noticed that Ma Chiao seems to be a little different from before? Jiang Sining took small bites of the grease hammer and looked at Ma Chiao, who was dancing the tap dance with a thoughtful look on his face. What's different? Because the street was too noisy, Yang Fan didn't hear it clearly. He moved closer to Jiang Sining and asked loudly. Jiang Sining said loudly, Ma Chiao seems to be a little different from before. Yang Fan said, how is he different? Jiang Sining shook his head and said, I can't say for sure. I grew up with Ma Chiao, so I'm very familiar with him. Although he still looks the same as before, but I just feel a little different. Jiang Sining tilted his head and thought for a moment, then added, That's right. It's the look in his eyes. In the past, when I looked at him, he was like a child who didn't grow up and only had the thought of playing. Now, when I look at him, he seems a little, manly. That's right, he's no longer like a child. He's a little like a man. Yang Fan smiled. He turned his head and looked at Ma Chiao, who was happily dancing. He also felt that Ma Chiao had really changed a lot. His character hadn't changed. He was still a born optimist. When it was time to play and make trouble, he was still carefree and happy. However, his attitude when doing things was different from before. The same thing he had done before, and the same thing he was doing now had a completely different flavor. Now, no matter what he did, he would be more serious, more thoughtful, and more persistent towards his goal. There must always be a goal in life, so that he wouldn't be like a ship without a rudder, lost in front of him. Yang Fan looked at Ma Chiao. Ma Chiao was holding the hands of the two girls, one in front of the other in the back, and they were walking to the beat. When he saw Yang Fan looking at him, he even made a face. Brother Chiao is planning to join the Imperial Army with me after the Lantern Festival, Yang Fan said with a smile. Join the Imperial Army? Jiang Sining asked in amazement. Is it that easy to be a member of the Imperial Army? Yang Fan said, Sister Ning, don't you know who our backer is? It's the master of White Horse Temple, Xue Huai. With just a word from him. What's so difficult about joining the Imperial Army? Jiang Sining looked at Ma Chiao in the distance, then looked at Yang Fan and said in disbelief, You guys? The two of you are Imperial Guards? Yang Fan smiled and said, Can I? The two of us don't have to be workshop attendants for the rest of our lives. Jiang Sining became happy and said, Of course. However, I'm really surprised that the two of you suddenly have the opportunity to be part of the Imperial Army. Good, this is great. The two of you have finally made a name for yourselves. Especially Ma Chiao, that guy. Jiang Sining looked at Ma Chiao in the distance and smiled with relief. Yang Fan glanced at her and said slowly, Sister Ning has already broken off her marriage with that Lu guy. Have you ever thought about what? Yang Fan raised his chin at Ma Chiao and smiled. Have you ever thought about becoming the wife of our future great general? Him. Jiang Sining habitually rolled her eyes at Ma Chiao in the distance. She looked at him carefully, and her fair cheeks blushed for no reason. She couldn't bring herself to ridicule him out of habit. Give it to me. Give it back to me. You two little ****stards. Ma Chiao suddenly shook off the two girls and ran towards Yang Fan and Jiang Sining. The two children ran in front of him, giggling and laughing. They bent their backs and squeezed in between Yang Fan and Jiang Sining. It turned out that although the scene of hundreds of people singing and dancing was spectacular, it was inevitable that some people would drop various things during the dance. Of course, if one took good care of something too expensive, it was unlikely that it would drop. Even if a hairpin did drop, it was usually made of wood and not worth much money. Therefore, there were some children who purposely circled around the dancers. If something dropped, they would pick it up. Ma Chiao wore a goatskin hat on his head. There was not a single hair on his head, and the hat was too smooth to hang on it. He danced and jumped for a while, and the hat fell to the ground and was picked up by the two little guys. The children were small in size, and they were as agile as fish in the crowd. Ma Chiao only chased after them for a few steps before he couldn't find them. He dejectedly returned to Yang Fan and Jiang Sunning's side. He touched his bald head and said, "I only sang for a while and I lost my hat. What bad luck." As he said that, he reached out to grab the oil hammer from Pasta's hand. Pa! Jiang Sunning slapped his hand away. Picking up the last piece of oil hammer, he snorted and said, holding a girl's hand, "Isn't it very comfortable to dance? You'd better continue dancing. Come, Xiao Fan, open your mouth." Ah! Yang Fan played the role of an obedient child and opened his mouth wide. Jiang Sunning threw the last piece of oil hammer into his mouth. Among the 3 people in Yang Fan's group, he was the youngest, but when it came to life experience and the ups and downs of fate, the older Ma Qiao and Jiang Sunning could not compare to him. Ma Qiao and Jiang Sunning were like a clump of grass on top of an ancient wall in an alleyway in Luoyang. The farthest scenery they could see was no more than the corner of the eaves. Yang Fan, on the other hand, was a clump of water grass floating on the sea. He had experienced a world that was thousands of times wider than theirs, so his knowledge and experience were more mature than the other 2. Similarly, among Xie Xiaoman's group, there might be people older than Xiaoman, but when it came to maturity, few could compare to her. Although her expression and movements sometimes looked delicate and childish, most of the time she was more gentle and quiet than her companions. At this moment, it was the Lantern Festival of the Upper Lantern Festival, and the streets of Dingding were bustling with noise and excitement. Everyone was chattering about which lantern was more beautiful, which girl had just walked past with the most gorgeous cape on her shoulders, and where the music that was being played was the most beautiful. However, Bucci was paying attention to the snow in the sky. It was snowing in the sky. The snowflakes were not big, and they gently curled up in spirals. That kind of faint and distant mood, when combined with the red light emitted by the lanterns, was especially fascinating. The fluttering snowflakes, the blurred lights, the noisy crowd, the chant of tug-of-war, the music of singing and dancing, and the crackling of firecrackers formed a beautiful scene of sound and shadow. Walking in this scene, Xie Xiaoman's state of mind was as lonely as the bright moon in the night sky. Girls of her age either pursued beautiful clothes and jewelry or longed for the husband they were about to marry. A little joy could fill their little hearts. The problem was, Xiaoman's heart had long been filled by one person, and that person's life and fate had become her only concern. The education that Niunia received was completely different from that of Yang Fan. Under the guidance of the old man who was over 100 years old, Yang Fan never let the hardships of his childhood leave any shadow in his heart. He was positive, optimistic, and looked forward to a better future. He did not forget his responsibilities, nor did he forget to pursue a happy life. Under the guidance of Auntie Xia, Xiaoman was taught to focus and single-mindedness from an early age. Once he had decided on something, he had to complete it. He had to be completely focused. Therefore, her thinking was completely different from that of Yang Fan. She was used to doing things with such a fixed mindset. Therefore, she rarely felt happy, unless she found her elder brother and ended this wish. She was afraid that she would carry this responsibility for the rest of her life and would not have the spare energy to pursue her own happiness. "Sistering, look at that carp lantern." Lan Yiqing casually pointed, but her finger suddenly stopped in midair. She took a closer look and said in surprise, "Sistering, look quickly. Isn't that the bald monk?" The bald monk that Lan Yiqing mentioned was Yang Fan. Yang Fan had played football in the palace a few times. Although the overall strength of the team was not as good as the inner palace team, his superb skills had convinced the girls in the palace. Recently, Yang Fan had been practicing football diligently and did not go to the palace. The girls would often think of him and talk about him when they played football. The bald monk was the nickname they gave to Yang Fan. Lan Yiqing put her hands on her waist and said angrily, "He is the head monk of the White Horse Temple. He is indeed a monk who does not abide by the rules. Look, he's changed into commoner's clothes, and he's acting sneakily. He's even with a girl. Oh, it's true. The other girls looked in the direction that Lan Yiqing was pointing and immediately started chattering. It's really him, it's really him. Hey, why do I feel that he is not as beautiful as a bald man wearing a hat? You love-struck fool. What are you looking at, this kind of monk who does not abide by the rules? Hey, you don't say, the girl next to him is quite beautiful. The girls were talking at once. 70 to 80% of them were curious to see what was going on. Although they called him a monk, in fact, they did not dislike Yang Fan. Yang Fan was recognized as a woman's friend in the show when workshop, from 8 to 80 years old, young and old. His charm was not just for show. The girls did not take the monk's behavior to heart. Who would have the time to pretend to be a Taoist priest? As long as they were willing, it did not matter. Xie Xiaoman suddenly saw her friends gathered together and chattering. It did not seem like they had seen some strange lanterns. She stopped and asked curiously, "What's wrong?" Gowing said, "Xiaoman, look, isn't that the bald monk?" Xie Xiaoman looked up and could not help but be slightly surprised. At this time, Lan Yiqing had already puffed out her small chest and proudly greeted him. "Stop!" Lan Yiqing slightly raised her delicate pointed chin and glanced at Jiang Suning, as if she had caught him in the act. "Humph! Master Hong Shiqi, where are you going?" Ma Qiao shook his big bald head and came out from behind Yang Fan. He said in surprise, "Oh, Miss Lan, why are you here?" Lan Yiqing was startled. She looked at the big bald head in front of her and asked in confusion, "Who are you? Do you know me?" Chapter 126. Ma Qiao was hurt and said, "Me. Miss Lan, don't you recognize me? Back then, I even gave you a ball and got beaten up by my brothers." It was no wonder that Miss Lan didn't recognize him. Ma Qiao had only participated in the Kuju competition once. From then on, he didn't even have the right to wave flags and shout battle cries. So Lan Yiqing didn't have any impression of him. So even though he was walking beside Yang Fan, the girls automatically thought of him as a passerby. Lan Yiqing really did think of him when he said that. She immediately felt a little discouraged. She thought that she had something to blackmail about the little bald monk. Since this bald donkey was also here, it was likely that the little bald monk and the young lady might not necessarily be a couple. Jiang Suning saw this pretty girl blocking their way and couldn't help but ask Yang Fan curiously, "Xiao Fan, who is this girl?" Yang Fan said, "This is Miss Lan. She's one of the people inside." He raised his thumb and pointed in the direction of the palace. Then he turned to Jiang Suning and said with a smile, "Miss Lan is very good at soccer. Little brother was almost at a disadvantage when I played soccer with her." In fact, although Lan Yiqing played well, she was far from Yang Fan. Since Princess Taiping and Shanghai Wanner weren't there, she and Gowing played the role of the vanguard. Therefore, the number of balls that were intercepted by Yang Fan from her hands was really innumerable. After hearing Yang Fan's words, the girl thought that he was teasing her. She couldn't help but blush and snorted. "You don't have to pretend. It's true that I'm not as good as you. But if you want to win, there's no way. We'll definitely win the Kuju competition tomorrow." Yang Fan laughed. "Don't be so sure. What if we win?" Lan Yiqing immediately became interested and rubbed her palms together. "Why? You want to bet something?" "Sure. Tell me. What do you want to bet?" Hearing that they were going to bet, the other girls also became spirited. Life in the palace was 100 times more boring than that of the common people. Every day was the same scenery and the same things. There was only so much space to begin with, and only a few people could be seen every day. The rules and laws were 100 times more strict than that of the common people. Therefore, in addition to the boredom, the people in the palace invented many games. These girls were addicted to gambling, such as fishing, boating, swinging, shuttlecock, and so on. A few girls came over and excitedly said, "Quickly tell us, what kind of prize will we have?" "We have won the championship every year in this Kuju competition. Do you think your White Horse Temple can do it?" "Humph! Although your martial arts are not bad, it's hard to support a lone tree. It's impossible for you to win. This lady will bet with you." When Ma Chiao heard this, he immediately stepped forward and stood in front of Yang Fan, saying loudly, "Can we bet on anything?" The girls said, "Anything is fine, just say it." Ma Chiao said in an imposing manner, "That's fine. If we win, Miss Lan will become my wife." Miss Lan's little face immediately turned red. She shyly scolded, "Bullsh, asterisk T. Who wants to marry you?" The other girls, on the other hand, all asked at once, "What happens if you lose?" Ma Chiao patted his chest and said, "If we lose, I will give myself to Miss Lan and become my husband." Scram! The girls pouted coquettishly and kicked Ma Chiao aside with their jade-like feet. "All right, stop fooling around." What a scandal on the streets! Xie Muin slightly furrowed her heroic brows and walked over. She looked Yang Fan up and down and smiled lightly. "Tomorrow is the Kuju competition. You still have the mood to parade the streets and watch the lanterns. Are you sure you will win?" Yang Fan smiled and said, "Miss Lan does not dare to accept the challenge. Could it be that Miss Xie wants to accept the bet?" Xie Muin raised her eyebrows and asked, "What bet?" Ma Chiao patted the dust off his body and said, "Naturally, if you lose, you will become my brother's wife. If we lose, my brother will compensate you and become your husband." Xie Muin ignored him and only said to Yang Fan, "In tomorrow's Kuju competition, if it's a free fight, you may have a chance to win. Unfortunately, it's not." Yang Fan said, "Maybe we will lose, but remember, I will not lose." "What do you mean?" Yang Fan said, "Those of us will not be able to catch up to you in a short period of time. However, if I can defeat all the heroes—" I'm wrong. It should be defeating all the girls. That will be enough for my White Horse Temple to be insufferably arrogant. And I have this ability." Xie Muin smiled and said, "You are too confident. Too much confidence is arrogance, Chief Master." Yang Fan raised his eyebrows and looked straight into her eyes. He said word by word, "Whether it is arrogance or not, you will know tomorrow. Miss Xie, it's not just you. Even the princess and Shengguan Daizhao, who are admired by all of you, will bow at my feet once they are on the court." While the two were arguing, there was already a person standing in the bustling crowd on the side of the road. She was looking at them with interest. This person was a woman dressed in men's clothing. Around her stood 4 women dressed in men's clothing. 4 extremely strong women dressed in men's clothing. The 4 women were like 4 giant pillars. They had thick thighs, thick waists, thick arms, and big faces. If one did not look carefully, one would really think that they were men. However, the woman in men's clothing standing in the middle of them looked very delicate and slender, even though she was tall and well-developed. This woman had a greasy nose, phoenix eyes, and red lips. Although she was dressed in men's clothing, which slightly concealed her beauty, she was still very charming. She was Princess Taiping Lilingyue. The true joy of admiring the lanterns was not something that could be enjoyed by the rich and powerful standing in their own courtyard, accompanied by a group of servants, admiring the lanterns of their own home. If one wanted to have true joy, he had to walk into the streets and have fun with the people. Princess Taiping had changed into men's clothing for the purpose of admiring the lanterns in the streets. Princess Taiping had originally brought 8 maids and 2 sons out to admire the lanterns, but the 2 children were still young. One was only 1 year old, and the other was only 4 years old. After playing for a while, they became sleepy. Princess Taiping ordered the 4 maids to take them back to the palace, while she and the other 4 continued admiring the lanterns. Along the way, her depressed mood gradually eased. When Yang Fan and Xie Xiaoman were making a bet on the street, she happened to pass by and saw this scene. As soon as Princess Taiping stopped, her 4 maidservants automatically stood around her, using their broad bodies to surround Princess Taiping tightly. Although there were many tourists on the street, no one could move them in the slightest. These 8 maids were all sumo wrestlers. Every year during the Lantern Festival, The sumo wrestlers in the palace would not only be male sumo wrestlers, but also female sumo wrestlers. If Yang Fan saw these 4 giant pillars, he would know why women could also win. Although they were women, they were more manly than men. Yang Fan raised his eyebrows and said in a powerful voice, "Not only you, even the princess and Shangguan Daizhao, who are highly respected by you, once on the court, they also have to bow at my feet." When he said this, Princess Taiping's eyes suddenly flashed, and the corners of her mouth gently hooked up into an interesting smile. At this moment, a man in a short brown shirt and a felt hat walked along the long street with his hands clasped in front of his chest. He smiled amiably and said, "Excuse me, excuse me, excuse me. Thank you for making way. Please make way." Behind him, there were 7 or 8 human-pulled carts slowly coming. Although the carts were not big, the poles on the carts were piled up like a small mountain. If they were not tied with ropes, they would have long been scattered on the ground. The man in front of them was surnamed Liu, called Liu Mo, and he was a merchant. Last year, during the Upper Yuan dynasty, he was stranded in Lantian County of Chang, and because he was a traveling merchant, he did not have time to rush back to Luoyang, so he spent the whole first month in Lantian County of Chang. And although he was in a foreign land, he still had to celebrate the festival. So Liu Mo also asked his family to buy colorful lanterns, poles, and prepared a sumptuous banquet. As a result, when he was burning the exploding rods, he was surprised to find that the exploding rods he bought were far louder than ordinary ones. Moreover, they would emit a beautiful glow and thick smoke as they burned, making it look even more festive. Liu Mo was a merchant, so he was very concerned about this. He quickly grabbed the unburned poles and examined them carefully. It turned out that there was a local man named Li Tian who came up with an ingenious idea. He stuffed saltpeter into the explosive rods. This way, the explosive rods would be more flammable. When they were burning, they would explode with loud noises and beautiful fireworks. The smoke billowed, creating a very festive atmosphere. After Li Tian invented this exploding rod, his exploding rod became the hottest-selling exploding rod in Lantian County. However, this person was not very business-minded. Although his exploding rod was selling well, he had never thought of expanding his business to other places. After Liu Mo figured out the trick, it was as if he had found a treasure. At this time of the year, people would throw some brittle bamboo poles into the brazier. When the fire burned, the bamboo would explode, making crackling sounds to celebrate the festival. Li Tian's invention was obviously more suitable for the festive atmosphere than the traditional poles. After Liu Mo returned to Luoyang, he tried making a batch on New Year's Day, and as expected, it was very popular. Liu Mo was greatly encouraged and hired a lot of people to work day and night, waiting for the 3 days of the Lantern Festival to make a lot of money. The poles he made were stuffed with saltpeter. Although the price was high, with the purchasing power of Luoyang's people, they could definitely afford it. There were hundreds of thousands of people on this 4-kilometer long street. Even if only 1% of them were willing to buy his poles, he would still be rich. Liu Mo bowed along the way, beaming with joy as he opened the way. Looking at the bustling crowd, he seemed to have seen a mountain of gold waving at him. As soon as Yang Fan said this, Lan Yiqing angrily rebuked, "Arrogant!" She was about to go forward and argue with him, but Xia Muin raised her hand to stop her. She sneered at Yang Fan and said, "All right, then this lady will wait and see. Let's meet at the Jew arena. Goodbye." Since Yang Fan was competing with someone, Ma Qiao obviously had to cheer for his brother. Seeing Liu Mo excitedly rushing over with 7 or 8 carts full of poles, Ma Qiao immediately yelled, "Shopkeeper, stop! We want to buy firecrackers to celebrate our victory in the Jew arena." Chapter 127. Xue Huai never mistreated his own people. Although Ma Qiao's grandmother and uncle didn't like him in the White Horse Temple, he still received quite a lot of pocket money. He immediately stopped Liu Mo and said with a rich and overbearing manner, "Come, unload 3 bundles of explosive sticks for me." Liu Mo smiled and said, "Dear customer, If you want to buy explosive poles, this old man will naturally welcome you. But this old man has to say something first. My family's explosive poles are more expensive than others, because my family's explosive poles. Before he could finish explaining the wonders of his family's explosive poles, Ma Chiao said carelessly, "Isn't explosive poles just explosive poles? How expensive can it be? Bring it down, bring it down. You can count how much you should charge." Ma Chiao took out a money bag from his pocket and generously stuffed it into Lu Mo's hand. Then he went to the car to bring the explosive poles. Lan Yiqing saw him like that and couldn't help but feel angry. He pulled Xia Xiaoman, who was about to leave, and shouted, "Sisters, let's buy some explosive poles too. Today is the Lantern Festival. Let's burn some explosive poles to celebrate. At the same time, let's wish that we will win tomorrow's Kuju competition." All the girls responded. Xia Xiaoman wanted to stop them, but then she thought that it was to celebrate the festival. It was rare for her sisters to go out of the palace, so there was no need to spoil their mood. So she smiled and didn't say anything. Ma Chiao carried 3 bundles of explosive poles and threw them on the ground. He turned his head and saw a family with a brazier burning in front of their door. The family's explosive poles had been burned out, but the brazier was still burning. Ma Chiao walked over to the owner and said, "Brother, can I borrow the brazier for a while?" The owner of the house smiled and nodded. Ma Chiao used 2 poles to prop up the brazier and placed it on the street. Then he placed the bundle of explosive poles on it. These explosive rods were filled with saltpeter and had already become flammable and explosive. However, no one had ever suffered from this kind of new product, so how could they have the awareness to guard against it? Even Lu Mo, who knew how explosive his rod was, didn't take it too seriously. Before this, very few people would let go of his rod on the spot. Sometimes they would at most try one. What's more, Lu Mo was happily counting the money in his hands. When he realized that Ma Chiao had piled all the sticks on the brazier, he faintly felt something was wrong. Just as he was about to stop him, the sticks had already exploded. Bang! Pa! Crack! Boom! Sparks flew everywhere, and thick smoke billowed. Ma Chiao's action was originally to anger those girls. Who would have thought that these explosive rods had such power? He was so scared that he screamed and jumped away. The other bundle of explosive rods in his hands also fell down and pressed on top of the burning explosive rods. Lan Yiqing and Gao Ying stood on the shaft of the carriage and just picked up the 2 bundles of explosive rods when the explosive rods on the brazier exploded. That loud noise and the eruption of flames scared the 2 girls so much that they let go of the explosive rods and hurriedly jumped to the side. As the 2 of them jumped and dodged, the mountain-like pile of explosive rods on the carriage shook twice and poured down with a crash, burying the brazier underneath. Boom! At that time, people didn't have a concept of safety, and the craftsmen who made the explosive rods weren't very careful either. The surface of the explosive rods was stained with a lot of saltpeter powder. When it rolled down, many of the explosive rods cracked and the saltpeter powder seeped out. Once it came into contact with the fire, it immediately made a muffled explosion. Then a ball of flame accompanied by thick smoke rose into the sky. A huge mushroom cloud soared into the sky, and a loud and muffled explosion shook the ground of Dingding Street. Following that, continuous explosions rang out like drum beats amidst the flashes of light. Everyone was dumbfounded. They had never seen such a powerful explosive rod, and they had never heard such concentrated explosions. There were flashes of light and frequent explosions. In just a moment, thick smoke filled a large part of the street. At this moment, someone finally woke up and shouted, "Run!" Then he covered his head with his sleeves and ran away like a rat. The workers who pulled the carriages were also scared out of their wits. They all abandoned the carriages and ran away. Sparks from the explosions flew everywhere, and soon the 2nd and 3rd carriages were ignited. The sound of explosions, fire, and smoke interweaved into one, and the street was filled with people running away like wolves. Yang Fan was dumbfounded and said, "CK. You can cause trouble just by lighting a firecracker." Ma Chiao said in a panic, This, how did it become like this? I've been lighting firecrackers since I was young, and I've never seen a King firecracker like this." God damn it. Don't go. You compensate me for my explosive rod, and you compensate me for my carriage. Where's the money? You compensate me. Lu Emo came out of the billowing smoke. The moment he saw Ma Chiao, he immediately spread out his 10 fingers and pounced at Ma Chiao like a malicious spirit coming out of the smoke. Ma Chiao was shocked. He reached out and grabbed Jiang Sining's little hand, shouting, "Run!" Then he ran away. Not good. The burning speed of the explosive rod was actually far slower than the firecrackers that came later. The problem was that no one had ever seen such a fast-burning explosive rod and such a powerful explosive rod, so they didn't think of dodging it at first. When they realized that the explosive rod was quite lethal, it was already a little too late to avoid it, and this caused a big mess. A pair of little girls in flowery jackets and cotton pants couldn't avoid it in time and fell to the ground. In the running crowd, only 2 small braids and a pair of small arms and legs could be seen. Yang Fan's eyes were sharp, and he couldn't help but be shocked when he saw this situation. He was afraid that the flames from the explosive rod would burn them, and he was even more afraid that they would be trampled by the running crowd. So he leaped up and flew over. At this time, the smoke was lingering, and it was already difficult to see anything. He used the memory of the glimpse he had just now to fly to the place where they fell. Almost at the same time, there was another figure beside Yang Fan. Yang Fan reached out and picked up a girl and put her under his ribs. Just as he was about to reach out to grab the other girl, the figure almost repeated his action, picked up a girl, and reached out to grab him. The two's palms touched slightly, and they were both shocked at the same time. Yang Fan suddenly looked up and saw a flash of fire in the smoke, suddenly illuminating the other's face. It was Xiao Man. Boom! The firecrackers on a car made a loud noise. The two of them simultaneously flicked their sleeves, brushing away the flying sparks and choking smoke, and said in unison, "Go!" Then they flew back. "You troublemaker, can't you be a little more obedient for once?" Jiang Sining was pulled by Ma Chiao all the way, and the more he thought about it, the more he found it funny. Ma Chiao was full of grievances, and as he ran, he shouted, "I swear to God! Do you think I want to cause trouble? I just want to annoy those girls and fight for my brother's face. How would I know that a bundle of firecrackers would make such a big noise? Have you ever seen firecrackers that catch fire so easily, burn so loudly and so brittle? It's really King evil." Ma Chiao complained as he ran, and suddenly stopped running, and exclaimed, "Oh no!" Ma Chiao suddenly remembered that he only cared about pulling Jiang Sining to escape, and did not care about Yang Fan, and wondered how he was doing. Of course, Ma Chiao knew that Yang Fan was a martial artist, and his movements were agile, so it was unlikely that he would be injured by the firecrackers. However, what if he was caught by the shopkeeper and asked for compensation? Although the firecrackers were cheap, the price of the big cars was also not cheap, and the car was also burnt. With this thought, Ma Chiao immediately stopped and turned back and hurriedly said, "No." As soon as the word "no" left his mouth, Jiang Sining, who could not stop in time, bumped into him. She threw herself into his arms, and her lips were pressed against his. Ma Chiao first felt pain on his lips, thinking that he must have hit it hard. Then he felt a pair of soft and thin lips pressing against his own, and for a moment his whole body froze. He was not a virgin, but Jiang Sining. She was his childhood playmate. He did not know if he treated her as a sister or as a brother. In short, it seemed like he had more family ties, and he had never treated Jiang Sining as a woman. But now, her lips were pressed against his. When they hit, his lips touched his teeth, and there was a slight pain. There was a slight fishy taste in his mouth, and Ma Chiao's brain did not have time to process whether his lips were broken, But at this moment, there was only a soft and smooth feeling on his lips, and there seemed to be a little sweet. Ma Chiao subconsciously stuck out his tongue and licked his lips. Ah! Jiang Sining suddenly came to her senses and pushed him away. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, and her face was red. If the first contact was a misunderstanding caused by her unsteady footing, but the next moment he actually licked her lips, Jiang Sining began to tremble like a pendulum. It really is sweet. Ma Chiao savored it for a moment, and his misty eyes suddenly fixed on Jiang Sining's face. His eyes suddenly widened. Me? Just kissed her? He? Just kissed me? Ah! The two of them cried out at the same time, turned around, and ran into the crowd, disappearing without a trace. Bang! Pa! The sound of exploding poles continued to rise and fall, and the several carts of exploding poles were not easy to burn down. The billowing smoke was like a black dragon, rising from the carts and permeating the whole street. Everywhere was filled with smoke, and many people were choking and coughing and crying. The parents of the girls thanked them profusely and led their daughter away. Seeing that the scene was in chaos, Xia Xiaoman and the others were also about to leave. Just as they were about to leave, Xia Xiaoman turned around and gave Yang Fan a deep look. She did not speak, but just raised her thumb. Yang Fan could see that this girl had some admiration for his behavior and his playing skills. However, her eyes were full of stubbornness and confidence. She raised her thumb, which was not only a silent praise, but also a challenge. This girl refused to admit defeat. Yang Fan grinned. At this time, Princess Flatboard was in trouble. Chapter 128. Ma Chiao and Lan Yiqing, the two childish people, fought with firecrackers, causing explosions. Princess Taiping, who had been watching from the sidelines, naturally saw it. She couldn't help but laugh at this scene. It seemed that wherever Yang Fan went, trouble would follow. When the firecrackers started to explode, Princess Taiping was also surprised that the firecrackers sold by this merchant were so flammable and could make such a violent explosion. But she didn't think too much about it and didn't rush to escape. As a result, because of this delay, when she wanted to leave, it was already too late. The firecrackers on the carriages crackled, and the fireworks rushed into the night. The people who were walking on the street to watch the lanterns heard the noise and squeezed over. The street was full of people at the same time, and the people at the scene, in order to avoid the explosion, were desperately trying to escape, so there was a traffic jam. In fact, if Princess Taiping was really in a hurry to escape, she could still escape. As long as she was like those ordinary people, she could rush into the sea of people, break open her arms and cut through the thorns, until her hat fell off, hairpin was lost, and her clothes were messy. She might be able to escape. But with her status, how could she do such a thing? As a result, Princess Taiping was blocked at the scene. It was only because of her 4 powerful female bodyguards that she was able to stand safely and not be squeezed by the fleeing people. At this time, the sparks from the bamboo poles ignited the colorful canopy on the street. The canopy was connected to the lantern house, so the fire spread to the lantern house. These things were tied up with straw, fine wood, silk, and silk cloth, which caught fire when it came in contact with fire, so the scene became even more lively. Water on fire! Water on fire! In the distance, a group of marquis hurried over with a cart. The cart was filled with big bags sewn from horse skin and cowhide, and each bag contained 300 to 400 caddies of water. It was inevitable for the lanterns to catch fire. Marquis Wu had been waiting by the roadside for a long time, but they didn't expect the fire to spread so fast. The cart was just pushed on the road when it was blocked by the crowd, and they were so anxious that they jumped up and down. Those who rushed out and those who rushed and converged into a huge, whirlpool-like wave. Although the 4 maids were extremely strong and all of them were sumo masters, they were still unable to keep up with the unending waves of collisions. They opened their eyes wide and exerted all their strength to resist the crowd from all directions so that they would not bump into the princess. But Princess Taiping's face showed a very amused expression. Ever since she was young, she had never experienced such a scene. Although she was now a wife and a mother, she was only 24 years old. She was still a very young girl, so it was inevitable that she had the mischievous nature of a child. This year's Lantern Festival is really interesting. Princess Taiping looked smilingly at the cars that were still exploding and spewing thick smoke amidst the bursts of flashes and loud noises. She looked at the colored buildings, colored squares, and colored corridors that were burning for the first time. She really wanted to scream, cheer, and run like an ordinary civilian girl, squeezing into the crowd and indulging her nature without concealment. But she couldn't because she was a princess, a noble princess of the Tang dynasty. She had obtained a noble identity and status that ordinary people couldn't obtain, and a good life. Correspondingly, she had to lose her freedom and herself. Li Lingyue enviously looked at those women who were supported by the maids and protected by the strong arms of the men. They were struggling to squeeze out of the crowd, although they were squeezed to the point that their clothes were disheveled, their hair was disheveled, and their faces were red. But in her eyes it was a kind of happiness. She would never have the chance to experience this kind of happiness. Pa! Another cluster of exploding rods exploded, and a few exploding rods exploded in all directions. One of the exploding rods flew directly in front of Princess Taiping. The four maids were facing away from Princess Taiping with their feet rooted to the ground and their arms wide open. They were trying their best to fight against the crowd, so they didn't see it at all. Princess Taiping saw a burst of sparks flying towards her, and her face couldn't help but change. She anxiously stretched out her hand to block it. Who? There was a gust of wind in front of her, and a big sleeve slapped the burning, exploding rod to the ground. It's too dangerous here, my dear brother, you should. Yang Fan stopped halfway through a sentence. He was tongue-tied as he looked at the charming face in front of him. After a while he said in surprise, Your Highness! Boom! Another loud sound rang out. Yang Fan subconsciously shrunk his neck and turned his head to look. He saw a colorful workshop falling down and smashing into the firecracker cart. The fire was even bigger, and the sparks were like billions of fireflies. Boom! They flew all over the sky, and it was a spectacular scene. Quickly take me to a safe place. Princess Taiping also found that it was not safe here. Her charming eyebrows slightly wrinkled, and she said to Yang Fan. Her identity made her say this sentence with confidence, and she didn't feel that there was anything wrong with it. Yang Fan also didn't feel that there was anything wrong with what Princess Taiping said. He waved his sleeve to brush away the sparks and asked, There are people everywhere. Where is safe? Princess Taiping said, This is something you should think about. I am a woman. How can I have an idea? These words were a bit coquettish, and Yang Fan didn't notice it in his hurry. He looked around and suddenly saw the huge lamp tree standing on the street. He couldn't help but have an idea and said, Your Highness, please follow me. He then ran towards the lamp tree. Your Highness! The four maids tried their best to stop the crowd from rushing towards the princess, and from time to time they would look back. At first, when they saw her talking to Yang Fan, the four maids weren't anxious, but when they saw that she wanted to leave with Yang Fan, they couldn't help but shout out. Yang Fan said, Why don't your Highness ask them to come together? If people always follow me, how can I be free? I don't care about them. Princess Taiping said with a smile, and turned back to wave at the four maids. Her face was full of smiles, and her lively appearance had a trace of mischievousness, like a little bird that finally escaped from the fence. Princess, this way, please. The street was full of people running to and fro. Yang Fan raised his left arm to help her block the oncoming crowd, and made an inviting gesture with his right hand. Suddenly his palm was warm, and a soft and delicate little hand was placed in his palm. Yang Fan was startled and turned his head to look. He saw Princess Taiping looking in front and said with a smile, What interesting place are you taking me to? Aren't we looking for a safe place? How did it become an interesting place? Yang Fan looked at the flower of Luoyang with a puzzled expression, looking at her eager and excited look. Perhaps she didn't care whether it was dangerous or not, but whether it was interesting or not, she was more attracted to it. Although it was somewhat inappropriate to hold the princess's hand in his hand. Fortunately, no one knew that this person was the princess, and the princess herself didn't care, so Yang Fan naturally didn't need to be pretentious. He pulled Princess Taiping's little hand and quickly ran to the bottom of the tall flowering tree. Princess Taiping stopped and giggled. Too fun, too interesting. This year's Lantern Festival is really more interesting than any other year. Because of the explosion in front, it attracted a large number of people, and the tap dance had already ended. Many people ran to the front, and the number of people here was a lot less. More people were running from farther places, and also ran to the place where the explosion occurred. Princess Taiping raised her small face that was slightly red from the cold, and looked at the huge flowering tree with a smile and said, "So spectacular! I have never seen such a flowering tree in the palace." Yang Fan smiled slightly and said, "This flowering tree was made by Master Shui. Princess, please follow me." Yang Fan walked to the bottom of the flowering tree and fiddled with it, and with a squeak sound a small door opened. Princess Taiping opened her eyes wide in surprise and happily said, "There is a completely different world here." She looked inside and eagerly asked, "Can I go in?" Yang Fan said with a smile, "This flowering tree is made of iron and wood. When the craftsmen make the flowering tree, they climb up and down and go in and out from here, so naturally we can go in." Princess Taiping was overjoyed and pulled Yang Fan's hand and said, "Let's go, accompany me in to take a look." The four maids saw that the princess was pulled away by a man and quickly chased after them. Seeing the princess being pulled by the man, and with a willing look, they also guessed that the princess must know this man, and that he was not some Jianghu bandit. Now that they reached the bottom of the flowering tree, they saw the princess pulling the youth into the lamp tree, and the four maids stood under the lamp and guarded the door. The inside of the lamp tree was very rough, and it was impossible for the craftsmen to carefully polish these places. Everywhere was a mess of wood and iron brackets, thick and thin, long and short. Fortunately, Princess Taiping was not wearing a skirt, and this was where the craftsmen went up and down, so there was no need to worry about any sharp objects like nails. The two of them were like climbing a narrow tower step by step until they reached the highest point. At the highest point, there was a leaf made of silk cloth dyed green, and in the middle was a stamen. The stamen was spitting out flames. When looking from below, this flower was the same size as an ordinary flower, but when they reached the bottom of the stamen, they discovered that it was huge. Just the height of the stamen alone was more than 1 zhang high. The space between the petals and the leaves was spacious enough for a person to stand or sit down. Princess Taiping stood under the stamen of the flower, raised her head to look at the flame above her head, and then stretched out her head to look down. She could not help but let out a sigh of admiration. The whole flowering tree was decorated with all kinds of lanterns, and all of them were made in the shape of various fruits, emitting bright light. Looking down from above, it was a gorgeous and colorful scene. This flowering tree was more than 100 feet high, and standing here, not only could one have a panoramic view of the entire Dingding Street, but also the brightly lit imperial palace in the distance and the colorful lanterns hanging high on the left and right sides of the street. The commotion caused by the firecrackers on Dingding Main Street could not be felt from above. This was because the commotion was concentrated in one area. Looking down from above, it would at most make one feel that the area was crowded with the most people. Looking into the distance, one could see that the whole of Luoyang was a sea of lanterns, a sea of people. Princess Taiping looked around, and for a moment she felt relaxed and happy. After watching for a long time, she held the stamen and sat down on the wooden flower leaf, covered with green silk cloth. Her 2 legs were suspended in the air, and she gently kicked them. That leisurely and carefree appearance was like a cute little girl sitting by the stream playing. Chapter 129. Sitting here, it was as if her whole body was integrated into the mysterious night sky. The wind around her made her feel as if she was flying. She could let go of her princess status and be free. She didn't have to remember her husband's tragic death. She didn't have to feel as if she was walking on thin ice. Although there was a thin leaf under her buttocks, could it be more dangerous than the Li Tang royal family? Princess Taiping breathed freely. She looked around happily for a long time. Then she turned her head to look at Yang Fan. She patted her side and said, "Come, sit down." Yang Fan walked to her side and sat down. He said, "Princess, you must be careful. Don't slide down. This place is 100 feet high. If you slide down, you will be finished." Princess Taiping laughed. Her laughter was a little presumptuous. Perhaps she hadn't laughed so freely for a long time. "That's why I asked you to sit with me. If I slide down, I will pull you down with me." Princess Taiping said with a smile. She pulled back her legs and curled up. She hugged her knees and rested her chin on her knees. She looked at the lights for a while. Then she tilted her head slightly and looked at Yang Fan. "Tell me about you." Yang Fan asked curiously, "About me? What about?" "Everything." Princess Taiping said, "There are too many curious things about you. I want to know all about you." Yang Fan was silent for a while. He smiled and said, "I was originally a beggar." Yang Fan started his story from the Guangzhou prefecture. It seemed that for as long as he could remember, he was already a child beggar who roamed the streets and alleys. He said that he was taken in by Nanyang merchants and returned to Luoyang after he came of age. Although he had already concealed many things in his story, it was already a very fresh story for this high and mighty princess who had never known the affairs of the common people. She listened carefully. Her long eyelashes blinked for a long time. In the starlight and lights, her eyes were bright and resplendent. After Yang Fan finished his story, Princess Taiping nodded slightly. She said thoughtfully, "So you are an orphan?" Yang Fan said sadly, "Yes, an orphan with no one to rely on." Princess Taiping was silent for a while. She smiled and said softly, "Actually, I am also an orphan." "Your Highness is an orphan?" Yang Fan looked at her in surprise. Princess Taiping was looking at a lantern 3 feet away from her feet in a daze. She said faintly, "That's right. You have been an orphan since you were young. Perhaps you are very pitiful. But after you became sensible, you watched your family leave you one by one until you were all alone. That kind of loneliness was even more unbearable." Yang Fan looked at her and did not speak. Princess Taiping pointed to the endless stream of people on the street and said, "I am very envious of these people. You've grown up, so it's easy for you to blend in, but I can't. You're like water, and I'm like a drop of oil. No matter how hard I try, I can only float on it all by myself." She sighed and hugged her legs even tighter, as if she couldn't stand the cold. "Originally, I was a little angry at you for rejecting my good intentions time and time again. Instead, you went to hug Xue Huai's thigh. Humph. Even if you have Xue Huai to protect you, I still have a way to deal with you." She turned her head and looked at Yang Fan. There was a hint of mischief in her eyes. "However, seeing that we are in the same boat, I will spare you." Yang Fan smiled bitterly. He cupped his hands in obeisance and said, "Your Highness is magnanimous. I can't thank you enough." Princess Taiping's pretty face turned serious. She said, "However, I can let this matter go. But tonight, you spouted arrogant words, saying that you want this consort to kneel at your feet. What do you mean by that?" Princess Taiping turned her head and looked at him. Under the light of the tree, the two of them were sitting among the leaves. Under the cover of the stamens and branches, the people below couldn't see them, and the light couldn't directly shine on them. However, their facial features were still very clear, and they looked even more gentle. Her eyebrows were long and delicate. Her phoenix eyes were big, the corners of her eyes were slightly raised, The black and glossy eyes made the black and white of her eyes even more distinct. Her eyes were charming and beautiful, but also as clear as water. There was the fragrance of a young married woman in the charm, and there was the innocence of a young girl in the clarity. Under the hazy light, there was a kind of blurriness that seemed right but was actually not. People couldn't help but think of a phrase when they saw it: charming eyes. Princess Taiping's charming eyes were not only charming. Yang Fan felt a little uncomfortable being stared at by this pair of eyes. His face showed a little embarrassment. At that time, I was just arguing with Miss Aman, so I casually talked big. So your Highness was there at that time and already heard it. A handsome young man showing such a bashful look in Princess Taiping's eyes. She did not know why, but her heart fluttered. She unexpectedly leaned forward and kissed him on the lips. Yang Fan was stunned. When Princess Taiping moved her pretty face away shyly, there was still a kind of soft feeling on his lips that made people tremble. His first kiss was inexplicably snatched away by Princess Taiping. So this was the feeling of kissing. He tried hard to recall it, but he couldn't capture that kind of feeling that was both real and illusory. He couldn't experience that kind of ecstasy. His body was on the flower tree in the air, but his soul seemed to have floated in the air. Princess Taiping let go of his lips, and her face became hot. She was so shy that she almost couldn't show her face. She didn't know what kind of medicine she had taken to make such a bold move. This was too slutty, right? So shameful. For a moment, Princess Taiping only felt that her lips and face were as if they were smeared with chili. It was numb and hot. Yang Fan looked at her in a daze. Her smooth and delicate chin was facing the light. It was soft and delicate, beautiful beyond compare. Under the light of the colored lights, one side of her face was bright and the other side was dark. At the border of light and dark, there was some shyness, some panic, some complacency, some overbearing, and some inexplicable joy. There was a kind of indescribable beauty that made Yang Fan have an impulse to kiss her again. Princess Taiping slightly tilted her head. Her fleeting eyes evaded again. Yang Fan was still looking at her. Li Lingyue had nowhere to hide. So she suddenly raised her head, widened her almond-shaped eyes, and fiercely said, "Look, what are you looking at? If you dare to say a word about what happened tonight, I will castrate you." Yang Fan was dumbfounded. The royal family was especially busy during the Lantern Festival. The nominal Emperor Li Dan was also invited to accompany the Empress Dowager to participate in all kinds of celebrations. The day before the Lantern Festival, which was the 14th day of the first month, the Emperor held a clan banquet and invited the Empress. All the members of the royal family were present. On the day of the Lantern Festival, the Emperor and the Empress Dowager summoned all the nobles, local officials, and foreign envoys who came to the capital to congratulate them. It was called the Imperial Banquet. During the banquet, the palace dancers performed large-scale court dances, and the musicians played large-scale court music. The Emperor and his ministers rejoiced together, symbolizing peace and prosperity. During the banquet, the Empress Dowager and the Emperor gave rewards and consolation to the foreign envoys and the nomads who submitted to the Tang dynasty. That night, there was a royal banquet. Just like outside the palace, the royal family also had to hang up colored lights and watch hundreds of plays. The Empress Dowager and the Emperor also had to bring the concubines up to the gate of heaven to accept the worship of the common people. During this period, the princes, dukes, ministers, and foreign envoys were all invited to watch. Princess Taiping was also invited. She could not stand that kind of formal celebration, so she used the excuse that her son wanted to have some fun. After reporting to her mother, she took them to Ding Ding Street for a tour. She did not expect that this night in Shangyuan was really a romantic memory. Every time she thought about it, Princess Taiping could not help but feel her eyes and ears redden, unable to control herself because of her impulsiveness and forgetfulness. On the second day of the Lantern Festival, The Empress Dowager and the Emperor had to formally meet the civil and military officials in the capital and accept their worship. Because there were many civil officials in the capital, the Shanghai Wanner would be the host. She would hold a choir, and everyone would recite poems to celebrate the prosperity of the Tang dynasty. At the same time, they would invite senior monks to the palace to preach. Xue Huai knew this, and Wu Zetian also knew that he could not be truly proficient in Buddhist scriptures. Therefore, they invited the real senior monks of Buddhism, Lao En and Shinsu. These two monks also solemnly recommended the sixth patriarch of Zen, Master Huining, to the Empress Dowager. As the saying goes, if you want Buddhism to flourish, monks must praise monks. These monks understood this very well. However, Huining knew very well that Empress Wu believed in Buddhism and placed great importance on Buddhism. Using Buddhism to suppress Taoism, which Li Tang believed in, was a great opportunity for the rise of Buddhism. However, if it failed, it could also bring disaster to Buddhism. He was the highest representative of Buddhism in the Tang dynasty. As long as he did not show up, Buddhism would not be too deeply involved in the political struggle. Therefore, if the Wu family failed, there would still be room for negotiation. Therefore, he declined the invitation with the excuse of his weak health. All kinds of grand palace banquets were basically held in the afternoon of the second day of the Lantern Festival. At this time, all kinds of entertainment events such as kuju, bowing, and sumo wrestling began one after another. The first event, held in the afternoon of the second day of the Lantern Festival, was sumo wrestling. It was the event that Princess Taiping's residence was best at. Chapter 130. Inside and outside the Jishin Hall, the civil and military officials, as well as the internal and external envoys, gathered together. In front of the hall was a 3 feet high platform covered with red carpet. This was the place for sumo wrestling. The invited officials who liked to watch sumo scattered around the 3 corridors surrounding the platform to watch. According to the customs of the Tang dynasty, whether it was the concubines of the palace or the women of the common people, they did not avoid meeting guests. Therefore, many of the concubines and maids were also crowded inside. Sumo wrestling was a type of wrestling. It was similar to the wrestling techniques of the grassland tribes, but the rules and specific techniques were different. Therefore, it was difficult for the sumo teams of the Turks and other countries to gain an advantage. In the past 3 years, the sumo championship had been won by Princess Taiping's residence. This year, it seemed that she was still determined to win. In the first match, someone from Princess Taiping's residence appeared. However, their opponent was not from the White Horse Temple, but the sumo wrestlers from Wu Sanxi's residence. Yang Fan watched the match seriously. There were both male and female sumo wrestlers from Princess Taiping's residence. The first one to appear was actually a female sumo wrestler. However, when he saw her cleanly win against the sumo wrestlers from Wu Sanxi's residence, Yang Fan couldn't help but frown. Her skillful martial arts, domineering strength, and vigorous posture were all extraordinary. It wasn't that martial arts were good, sumo wrestlers were good. The only difference between them was physical fitness. If the two were to fight face to face, Yang Fan was confident that he could defeat the female sumo wrestler in 3 moves. However, if they were to fight on the stage according to the requirements of sumo wrestling, it would take a lot of effort. The female sumo wrestler from Princess Taiping's residence was obviously not the best sumo wrestler. Thinking of this, Yang Fan couldn't help but say to Chu Kuanga, "No wonder Princess Taiping's residence could win the sumo championship 3 times in a row. Just by looking at the female sumo wrestler who appeared first, you can see how good they are. It's hard to find a match for them in sumo." Chu Kuanga said, "That's natural. However, Kuju and sumo wrestle are all teams. The 2 of us are limited by the team strength, so I'm afraid it will be difficult to win. If we want to win glory for Master Xue, we have to go all out. Even if we can't win the team, we have to win the individual championship." Yang Fan nodded lightly and said yes. I admit that their sumo wrestling skills are not bad, but they might not be able to beat me. Sumo wrestling is up to you and me. We must take the #1 spot from Princess Flatboard." The two looked at each other and smiled. Yang Fan's first opponent was a Tibetan called Kangong Jebu. This person also made the same mistake as Song Air. As soon as he saw Yang Fan's slender figure, his heart was filled with contempt. As soon as the match started, he went straight for Yang Fan, not holding anything back. He wanted to send Yang Fan out of the arena in one move. In the end, Yang Fan took a step forward, cut off his attack, twisted his wrist, and pushed him to the ground with just one fall. Yang Fan pressed down on his body and tightly gripped his joints, making him unable to get up for a long time. This pounce was called the lifeguard pounce in sumo. Kangong Jebu lost miserably. Although he knew that it was because of his carelessness, he couldn't say anything. Chu Kwanga's first opponent was a sumo expert from the Tang Dynasty's imperial army. Both of them were tall and strong. Chu Kwanga had the advantage in experience, while that person was young and vigorous. The sumo wrestling between the two was far more interesting than Yang Fan's simple and clear fight. The two of them fought for 7 or 8 rounds. Chu Kwanga used a goose wing fall and knocked his opponent to the ground. Amidst the cheers of the audience, he also obtained the qualification to advance. Sumo wrestling didn't last long. Every match was decided in a very short amount of time. Even sumo wrestlers with similar skills were the same. One mistake and they would immediately lose. Fighting for 300 rounds was simply unimaginable. As a result, it didn't take long for the contestants to advance to the finals to be determined. Yang Fan and Chu Kwanga were both contestants who advanced to the finals. In addition, there were 6 more spots. The Princess Taiping's residence took 3 spots. The other 3 spots were occupied by the Tibetans, the Turks, and the Minister of Rights, Wu Sansi. However, the sumo wrestler raised by Wu Sansi's residence was a Turk, so he could be considered as external help. The imperial army was completely annihilated. Professional soldiers like them couldn't compare to these professional sumo wrestlers who didn't do anything else but immerse themselves in the art of sumo. During the Qilin selection, Empress Wu and many other important officials had been drinking in the hall and had not come out to watch. Only now, on the white marble steps of the main hall of the Immortal Gathering Hall, a yellow silk umbrella finally appeared. The Empress Dowager, the Emperor, the ministers, and the members of the imperial family all came out to watch. When the Empress came out, everyone stopped what they were doing and greeted her. Yang Fan was very curious about Empress Wu. When he greeted her, he took a peek. From afar, he was secretly amazed by Empress Wu's appearance, which clearly didn't match her age. Immediately, he saw Princess Taiping beside Wu Zetian. Princess Taiping looked around as if she was looking for something. When Yang Fan saw her, he quickly lowered his head. When he lowered his head, he felt as if 2 pairs of eyes were staring at him. Yang Fan raised his head slightly and met Princess Taiping's smiling eyes. Yang Fan was caught red-handed by her and felt very embarrassed. He was embarrassed in his heart, but his face revealed such a young man's attitude. When Princess Taiping saw this, her eyes suddenly showed a smile. Wu Zetian sat down on the rope bed, smiled and asked everyone to sit down and ordered, "You can start." The first pair to go up was Chu Kwanga and a Tibetan player. The Tibetan was a military officer beside a Tibetan envoy in the Tang Dynasty. He was also a first-class wrestler in the country. Sumo wrestling was popular in the Tang Dynasty. After he came to the Tang Dynasty, he was very familiar with the art of sumo wrestling. The 2 wrestling techniques were similar, so he could be considered a master. Last year, in the sumo wrestling competition, he had won 3rd place. Unfortunately, he met Chu Kwanga this year. Chu Kwanga was most proficient in Bao fighting and sumo wrestling. Back then, when he was in the Imperial Army, he was already famous in the 3 armies. In recent years, he had been wandering among the common people and had fewer opportunities to ride a horse. On the contrary, the number of times he fought sumo wrestling had increased. Chu Kwanga had made up his mind to show off his skills in the sumo wrestling competition, so he went all out. The Tibetan player knew the famous sumo wrestlers of the Tang dynasty like the back of his hand. In his impression, only the sumo wrestlers of Princess Taiping's mansion were his strong opponents, but he did not expect that Chu Kwanga would appear out of nowhere. Chu Kwanga's fighting style was different from the sumo wrestlers of Princess Taiping's mansion. Although he paid attention to techniques, he paid more attention to using his strong physical fitness to fight head-on with his opponent. This was originally the Tibetan's best method of wrestling. The Tibetan was anxious to win, but Chu Kwanga disrupted his attacking rhythm. In the end, he was taken by Chu Kwanga's fall. He lost his footing and knelt on one knee, losing the match. Next was the sumo wrestler of Wu Sanxi's mansion against the sumo wrestler of Princess Taiping's mansion. In the end, the foreign aid that Wu Sanxi invited was lifted by the belt by the female sumo wrestler of Princess Taiping's mansion, who was more majestic than a man, and directly thrown out of the arena. It could be said that he won the most carefree match. The third match was between Yang Fan and the sumo wrestler of Princess Taiping's mansion, Yi Weining. Yang Fan had not fought with this Yi Weining before, so when he heard the name, he thought that it was a man. But when he walked onto the stage, he found out that it was a woman, a very tall and sturdy woman. Yang Fan vaguely remembered that he had seen this woman last night. At that time, she was one of the 4 strong women who were guarding Princess Taiping. Yang Fan subconsciously glanced at the stands. Princess Taiping was dressed in luxurious makeup, graceful and gorgeous like a peony flower. She was sitting beside Wu Zetian, holding a bright apricot in her hand, and gently placing it into her tender and beautiful sandalwood mouth. When she saw Yang Fan looking at her, Princess Taiping's big eyes rippled, and her eyebrows slightly raised, revealing a look that said, "I want to see you have a good show." Xue Huai was wearing a purple kasaya, and his seat was originally behind Wu Zetian. At this time, when he saw Yang Fan enter the arena, Xue Huai couldn't help but jump up, waving his fists, and loudly shouted, 17! Get rid of her! Get her back for me! Master! Wu Zetian rebuked him with a glare. After all, this was the imperial palace, and Xue Huai was shouting like this, which was really not proper. Only then did Xue Huai realized that he had forgotten himself, and hurriedly sat down in embarrassment. Wu Zetian smiled and said, "Is this little monk a disciple of Master? I see that his body is much weaker than the female sumo wrestler in Taiping residence. Can he win?" Xue Huai said, confidently, "Empress, as the saying goes, you can't judge a book by its cover. This poor monk's disciple is proficient in sumo wrestling, and there's nothing he doesn't know. Although it was Princess Taiping's residence that won the championship for 3 years in a row, I'm afraid this time it's our White Horse Temple's turn to show off our might." Princess Taiping listened and smiled without saying a word. Wu Sanxi, Wu Qingxi, and the others took the opportunity to flatter him, one after another. Xue Huai listened with pride, as if the sumo wrestling championship was already in his hands, looking left and right, insufferably arrogant. On the stage, Yang Fan and the female sumo wrestler had already begun to compete. The opposite woman had a round collar, arrow sleeves, and was dressed in a short robe. She cupped her fists in greeting, then stepped forward and grabbed his chest. Yang Fan flashed his palm and knocked her wrist, and the two of them quickly exchanged positions. As soon as they exchanged blows, Yang Fan understood why his opponent was able to become a famous sumo wrestler despite being a woman. This woman's figure was strong and vigorous, and her sumo techniques were superb. Her hands and legs were hard like pillars, and when they were soft, they were like snakes. If one was the slightest bit careless and got entangled by her, they would be thrown to the ground. Yang Fan roused his spirit to fight with her. After fighting for 7 or 8 rounds, Yang Fan deliberately showed an opening, luring her to grab his belt. Seizing the opportunity, he used the superior skill of the 18 staining falls to shake off her palm. It was unknown how many sumo wrestlers this woman had competed with, but she was experienced and skilled. When her palm was shaken off, although she was surprised, she knew something was wrong and quickly retreated. But Yang Fan had been waiting for this moment, taking advantage of the time when she was pouncing forward to stretch out her palm. He took advantage of the momentum, and the woman staggered and fell down, although her movements were light and graceful, and she only pressed her palm lightly on the ground before spinning around and standing still. In a sumo match, she had already lost. The woman turned around and cupped her fists towards Yang Fan. Her fierce-looking face unexpectedly revealed a trace of a gentle and admiring smile. "Young Langjun, good kicks and punches." Chapter 131. The sumo match was held very quickly. Amidst the cheers and comments of the crowd, the outcome was decided very quickly. Princess Taiping, who had won the sumo championship for 3 years in a row, was defeated by Yang Fan and Chu Kwanga. In the end, the two sumo wrestlers from Princess Taiping's residence fought for third place. First and second place were destined to be between Yang Fan and Chu Kwanga. Both of them represented White Horse Temple. No matter who won or lost, first and second place were destined to belong to White Horse Temple. Xue Huai beamed with joy. Wu Sansi, Wu Qingxi, and the others began to flatter Xue Huai, raising their cups to congratulate him. Xue Huai downed his cup, not declining at all. On the stage, Yang Fan looked at Chu Tinga with a smile and said, "Brother Chu, it's time for you and me to fight next." Chu Tinga smiled and said, "That's right. You and I need to go all out in this fight." Their gazes met, and they both saw a cold fighting spirit in each other's eyes. They couldn't help but smile at each other. Hong Lu stood below the stage and flicked his bald head. He said with a smile, "Master Xue is very happy that we won the sumo championship. 17 and 19 are both on our side, so it doesn't matter who takes first place. This time, we'll just pretend to be on the stage. In a while, we'll take the championship back." The two people on the stage didn't think so. From each other's eyes, they could see a kind of stubbornness, a kind of persistence. Perhaps because the final winner could only be between the two of them, the ranking was no longer that important. However, they still wanted to compete seriously. This was a spar between brothers, and it had nothing to do with victory or defeat. Originally, they thought that the two from White Horse Temple would just play it off, but they soon discovered that they were very serious. They were even more serious than when they were competing with others. The two of them circled around each other 3 times before launching a probing attack. Chu Kwanga was tall and mighty, but it was destined that his lower body was not as stable as Yang Fan's. His figure was also not as flexible, so Yang Fan slightly lowered his shoulders and stared at Chu Kwanga's lower body. As soon as Chu Kwanga saw his movements, he knew what he was planning and immediately increased his vigilance. With his tall figure, his lower body was certainly not as flexible as his upper body, but he was skilled in martial arts and his leg techniques were also good. If Yang Fan wanted to plot against his lower body, he had to guard against his kicks. The two of them exchanged a few blows, but both of them separated as soon as they touched. This kind of tentative contact was followed by an explosive collision. Sure enough, Chu Kwanga shouted loudly and took the initiative to attack. With a black tiger steel's heart, he slashed towards Yang Fan's chest. Yang Fan leaped and suddenly lowered his body. He swept past Chu Kwanga's ribs and reached out to slap his back. Chu Kwanga's palm missed, but he had already turned around with a tiger spin. His hands reached towards Yang Fan's shoulders and neck, and his feet quickly stretched out to kick Yang Fan's lower body. Yang Fan collided with him, but he lost his footing and retreated 3 steps in a row. Chu Kwanga did not hesitate. He took 3 steps forward, and in one breath he performed 3 techniques: hanging gua fall, rising sun fall, and goosewing fall. Half of Yang Fan's embarrassment was real, but the other half was intentional. He wanted to use this series of dodging and retreating movements to lead Chu Kuanga to attack fiercely and mess up his pace. He didn't think that Chu Kuanga was an experienced wrestler. He was fast but not messed up, and instead messed up Yang Fan's pace. Yang Fan dashed, wanting to jump out of Chu Kuanga's encirclement. However, he didn't expect Chu Kuanga to suddenly lower his body, like a fierce tiger coming down the mountain. With a gust of wind, he blocked Yang Fan's path. His right hand grabbed Yang Fan's wrist, and his left hand reached into his crotch. He shouted, "Up!" and lifted Yang Fan's entire body into the air. If it was a competition of martial arts, Yang Fan could have chopped the back of his neck with his palm, or when he reached out to grab him, he could have punched out with both fists and directly hit his abdomen. However, this was sumo wrestling, not sanda. Now that he was caught in his hands, Yang Fan could do nothing. At this time, Chu Kuanga only needed to throw him out of the ring with both hands. Chu Kuanga raised his voice and said, "Brother, are you convinced?" Yang Fan cupped his fists in midair and said, "Big brother's wrestling skills are godly. Little brother is convinced." Chu Kuanga laughed and put him down. Off the stage, thunderous cheers. When she saw Yang Fan being lifted high into the air by Chu Kuanga, Princess Taiping laughed. That little guy also has times when he is defeated. This made Her Highness very happy. "Mother, I'm going to change my clothes. It's going to be a kuju in a while." Princess Taiping stood up gracefully and said to Wu Zetian. On the other side, Wan also bowed and said, "Empress of Heaven, Wan and the princess withdraw together." "Good. Hee. For the past 3 years, Taiping has been the sole champion of sumo wrestling. But this year is different. My master has been quiet all this while, but with a single brilliant feat, he has become the champion of sumo wrestling. Taiping, Wan, the two of you have to buck up. Don't lose another round of sumo wrestling. Your daughter will do her best." With that, Princess Taiping bowed gracefully and left with Shangguan Wan. Wu Zetian excitedly patted the armrest, happily stood up and said, "Let's go to Anfu Palace. I want to personally watch the match." Wu Zetian moved to Anfu Palace, accompanied by the civil and military officials and the royal family. On the wide field between Anfu Palace and the observation platform, the kuju field had already been arranged. The referee and other personnel were already in place. On both sides of the field, the members of the White Horse Temple team and the Inner Palace team had already changed their clothes and were warming up their bodies, preparing to enter the field. In previous years, no one could compete with the Inner Palace team in this kuju competition. Sometimes, no one was willing to participate in this competition. In the end, the Inner Palace team could only be divided into 2 teams and compete with each other for the Empress of Heaven's entertainment. This year, it was rare for someone to take the initiative to challenge. Although everyone was sure that the White Horse Temple would lose, they were still quite interested in watching. Not to mention other things, just the 2 teams competing in this competition. One was a bald monk in a khaki martial suit, and the other was a group of beautiful women in green jackets and green trousers. This scene was enough to make one look at it. Yang Fan and Chu Kuanga had already analyzed the strength of the Inner Palace team. Although the monks of the White Horse Temple had trained hard, it was impossible for them to win against the strongest team of the Tang Dynasty. Because the overall level of the entire kuju team was low, the 2 of them were unable to turn the situation around. Moreover, in this aspect, Chu Kuanga was also not as good as him. At most, he was at the same level as Xie Xiaoman and Gao Wing. The 2 experts that the other side had been advocating for, Princess Taiping and Shangguan Wan, had not yet appeared in the competition. If it were not for their high status, which caused the palace maids to deliberately promote them, their strength was also quite good, and the White Horse Temple would have no hope of winning. Therefore, before the competition, they had decided on the strategy for this kuju competition. The victory would definitely belong to the Inner Palace team. However, in terms of individual performance, they had to promote Yang Fan. The Inner Palace team won the entire competition. If Yang Fan's outstanding performance could leave an indelible impression on the people, It would be enough to suppress the inner palace team's limelight, and Master Shui would not feel that it was a loss of face. The tone of the whole competition was thus set. Yang Fan, Chu Kuanga, and Hong Lu were the main attackers, while the other 7, led by Hong Wen, defended with all their strength. At the same time, they created all opportunities for Yang Fan to score goals. In the end, even if the inner palace team won, they were still the ones who scored the most individual goals. It had to be said that their overall strength was not as good as the others, but their idea was still very smart. The inner palace team entered the field. Yang Fan keenly discovered that Shangguan Wan'er stood in the position where Lan Yiqing usually stood, and Xie Xiaoman stood in the position where Gao Ying usually stood. Lan Yiqing and Gao Ying retreated to the back. Xie Xiaoman usually stood in the position where they played, but now she stood in Princess Taiping's position. Princess Taiping now played the role of a free middle position, and she was the key figure of the entire team. Whether it was defense, steals, blocking, or offense, she basically controlled everything. In the case that Princess Taiping and Shangguan Wan'er did not participate in the competition before, this role was originally played by Xie Xiaoman. Lan Yiqing and Gao Ying originally played the role equivalent to the forward, but now Shangguan Wan'er and Xie Xiaoman played the role, and they retreated to the position of the forward. At this time, the distribution of the roles and the corresponding functions in the Kuju competition were not very clear, but the roles they played could be roughly estimated from their positions. After seeing the other party's arrangement, Yang Fan, Chu Kuanga, and Hong Yi immediately gathered together and whispered to each other. 17, it seems that they want that little girl Xiaoman and Shangguan Dai Zhao to be the main attackers and Princess Taiping to take charge of the overall situation. How should we deal with it? Hong Lu touched his bald head and said, "We have experienced the martial arts of that little girl Xiaoman. Except for you, 17, no one can control her. I think it's up to you to deal with her. 19 will deal with Princess Taiping, and I will deal with Shangguan Dai Zhao." Chu Kuanga pinched his chin and pondered. 6 senior brother thinks that Shangguan Dai Zhao is the easiest to deal with. Hong Lu said, looking at her delicate and timid figure, "I don't think she is very powerful." Chu Kuanga shook his head and said, "When 17 wrestled, the opponent saw his figure and didn't think much of it. What was the result? Since Shangguan Dai Zhao dared to stand in this position, her skills must be good." Hong Lu said, "So what? Could it be that she is better than that little girl Xiaoman?" Chu Kuanga shook his head and said, "Not necessarily. I think that Miss Xiaoman should be the opponent's #1 expert." "Wow. Then let's get 17 to deal with her." "No. Our overall strength is weaker than the opponent's. If we can't be like a sharp knife and stab straight into the heart of the enemy, once we're blocked there, our spirit will be lost and we will definitely lose this battle. We have to use some tricks." Yang Fan's eyes flashed, and he asked as if he had understood something. "Brother Chu, you mean," Chu Kuanga said, "the inferior 4 against the superior 4. Yang Fan clapped his hands and said with a smile, "That's exactly what I want." Hong Lu said blankly, "What do you mean by inferior 4 against the superior 4? Yang Fan explained, "It means that they know that Miss Xiaoman is the strongest, so they have to trouble 6th senior brother to hold her back. Only if 6th senior brother holds back the strongest one will we have a chance to win back some face for Master Shui." Chu Kuanga sighed and said, "No matter how I look at it, there is no one else but you, 6th senior brother, who is worthy of such a great responsibility." Hong Lu was very happy when he heard this. He puffed out his chest and said, "That's right. All right, leave Miss Xiaoman to me. See if I don't tie her down." On the opposite side, Lan Yiqing put her hands on her waist impatiently and said in a delicate voice, "Hey, what are you guys whispering about? Have you discussed it?" All right. Hong Lu agreed and waved his hand. The bald monks of White Horse Temple dispersed with a whoosh. The kickboxing competition had officially begun. Chapter 132. At the beginning of the game, Yang Fan felt the sharpness of the opponent's offense. With the addition of Princess Taiping and Shanghai Wanner, the overall strength of the team seemed to have increased to another level, and they played their skills to the fullest. Princess Taiping was more in control of the overall situation than Xie Xiaoman. Under her command, the entire team grasped the rhythm better and played better. Shanghai Wanner was also a big surprise. Her skills in snatching the ball, dribbling the ball, and attacking were also very clever, which complemented Xie Xiaoman on the other side. As long as the ball was under their feet, the two of them would fly up like two dragons, advancing by leaps and bounds all the way. Behind them, there was a group of monks who were swayed by them. It was hard to imagine that such a delicate and timid woman could be so vigorous and agile on the court. There were indeed few delicate women in the Tang dynasty, especially her chest. She should have worn a bra, but when she ran, the rise and fall of her chest was still very heavy and textured. Such a slender person should not have such a big chest. This problem greatly affected the performance of Yang Fan's skills. It was really troubling. There was almost no suspense in the game. Without Princess Taiping and Shanghai Wanner, the overall strength of the team was stronger than that of the White Horse Temple. Now, with the addition of these two first-class players, it was simply unstoppable. However, from the beginning, the monks of the White Horse Temple had formulated a correct strategy. They did not care about the overall situation, but only created opportunities for Yang Fan. They wanted to create a personal legend that belonged to Yang Fan. They wanted to use one person's brilliant achievements to steal the brilliant achievements of a group of people. Today, 9 out of 10 people in the White Horse Temple team were united, and they only wanted to support one person and create a god on the field of Kuju. All the balls were intercepted for him, and all the balls were passed for him. Hong Yi and Chu Kuanga opened up a path from the left and right, sharing the burden of being chased and intercepted by him from the left and right. Yang Fan went straight to the point, using his superb skills to put on a solo performance, which attracted the attention of the entire audience. Feints to spike the ball, clipping the ball to pass the opponent, bouncing the ball to pass the opponent, back hooks over the top, a variety of gorgeous moves, making it impossible for the eyes to miss them. The more superb the opponent's ball skills, the more agile the movement, and the more ferocious the steals, the more Yang Fan's moves looked. It was a kind of pleasing to the eye sport's beauty. Yang Fan successfully captured everyone's attention. Even Empress Wu, who had never been interested in Kuju, could not take her eyes off him. Although she did not understand Kuju, nor did she understand the superb dribbling skills Yang Fan displayed, she naturally knew how to appreciate the perfect combination of strength and beauty. This little husband is really good. Wu Zetian pointed at Yang Fan and couldn't help but praise him. As soon as the score began to pull apart, Xue Huai, who had already pulled a long face, gradually regained his pride because of the constant exclamations and praises of Yang Fan's outstanding performance. At this time, when he heard the Empress Dowager's praise, he couldn't help but become even more happy. "Stop him!" Shanghai Wanner was really angry. Her curved eyebrows were raised, and her clothes fluttered. She rushed over to intercept the ball under Yang Fan's feet. Yang Fan touched the outside of his foot and made a feint to pass the ball. As soon as Shanghai Wanner's figure flashed, Yang Fan hooked the inside of his foot, and the ball obediently returned to his feet. Taking advantage of the moment when Shanghai Wanner's figure paused, he flew past her. Bastard! Shanghai Wanner, who had always been gentle, was so angry that she couldn't help but curse. Xie Xiaoman, Gao Ying, and Lan Yiqing, the 3 masters, surrounded him together. It wasn't that Hong Lu didn't try hard, but he really couldn't keep up with Xie Xiaoman's pace. At first, he was quite close to her, but now that he was running all over the field, he was so tired that he couldn't catch up with Xie Xiaoman. Yang Fan saw that the 3 of them were closing in, so he took advantage of the moment when they were about to close up and dashed past Lan Yiqing. He laughed and said, "I've been fooled again." "Ah, what a bastard!" Lan Yiqing was about to go crazy with anger. She turned around and saw Yang Fan dribbling the ball straight to their own goal. Their own players rushed up, but Yang Fan used a series of passing moves to get rid of the enemies who were chasing and intercepting him. As soon as he saw Chu Kuanga coming from the sidelines, he immediately passed the ball over. Chu Kuanga dribbled the ball and ran. Seeing that the other side had several players surrounding him, he was on the sidelines and had limited space to turn around. With a lob shot, the ball accurately passed to Yang Fan's feet. At this time, because of their offensive from the left and right, a large number of opposing players were led to the sides, and the center line was already empty. Yang Fan decisively dribbled the ball to the center position. "Brett, that's enough. Do you think I'm nothing?" A figure flashed in front of him, and Princess Taiping was standing in front of him with her almond-shaped eyes. She slightly bent down to block the ball. Wearing a tight outfit, she had a kind of valiant and formidable-looking aura. Yang Fan looked at her bright and charming lips and suddenly smiled. This smile was as bright as the sun, which made Princess Taiping's heart sway. Then a figure flashed in front of her, and Yang Fan disappeared again. Princess Taiping only felt a slight numbness between her two thighs, as if something had quickly rubbed against her. When she turned around to look, she saw that Yang Fan had passed through her crotch, kicked the ball between her legs, and dribbled the ball straight to their goal. The palace maid who was guarding the Eye of the Wind rushed over, and Yang Fan volleyed the ball into the air. "Brat, you dare to use a honey trap on me." Princess Taiping's face became hot, and she gritted her teeth in her heart. But she also understood that Yang Fan's feint was done in one go, and it was very clever. Even if he did not laugh, she would not be able to stop this ball. The score between the two sides was widening, and the Imperial team naturally had the upper hand. But Yang Fan's personal limelight had also been incisively and vividly displayed. The hourglass was still leaking, and it was getting closer and closer to the end of the match. At this time, there were already 9 red flags on the side of the inner palace team, indicating that they had scored 9 goals. On the other hand, there were only 4 red flags on the White Horse Temple team. However, of the 9 goals, Xie Xiaoman had scored 3, Shang Guanwaner had scored 2, and the remaining 4 goals were scored by Princess Taiping, Lan Yiqing, Gaoing, and another team member. And the other 4 goals were all scored by Yang Fan alone. At the same time, the defensive players of both sides were strong and weak. Even those who did not understand the game could see that in the later stages, only Chu Kuanga shared the pressure for Yang Fan, and Yang Fan was almost fighting alone. In this situation, he was still able to score 4 goals, and the brilliance on the field was really taken away by him. This was the palace, the home field of the Imperial team. But the situation on the field had become a one-sided performance of Yang Fan's skills, and everyone was cheering for him. Xie Xiaoman raised her sleeves and wiped the sweat on her forehead. She stared bitterly at the figure of Yang Fan, who was getting more and more energetic as he played, and said, "This treacherous little thief, he actually came up with such a method." Seeing that the hourglass was about to run out, the referee loudly reported the time to them. At this time, the ball was at the feet of Hong Yi. Hong Yi passed the ball to Chu Kuanga, who rushed with the ball and was almost intercepted by Xie Xiaoman, who passed the ball to Yang Fan in time. When Shanghai Wanner saw this, she gritted her teeth and rushed up. Yang Fan dribbled the ball left and right and made 3 180-degree turns in a row, which destroyed Shanghai Wanner's full effort to save the ball. After 2 rapid turns, Yang Fan was already facing Shanghai Wanner with his back to the goal. He tiptoed, and the ball flew up. He stopped with his chest out, and the ball went into the net with an inverted golden hook. Yang Fan did not fall after the inverted golden hook. He swung his calf in the air, turned his body, and stood up steadily with his left hand on the ground. No one thought that he would turn his back to the goal and kick. The people who originally wanted to come up and grab the ball were all too late to stop him. At the last moment, the game ended with a score of 9-5. Yang Fan also added a point of glory to himself with the last magnificent goal. Damn it! The talented woman, Shanghai Wanner, only said such a sentence and fell to the ground in a very ugly posture. Her movement to intercept Yang Fan was too fast. She followed Yang Fan's 3 rapid turns and constantly corrected her movement, which caused her to lose her center of gravity. When Yang Fan shot the ball with an inverted golden hook, she also lost her balance and fell forward. At this time, Yang Fan just stood up. When he saw this situation, without thinking, he rushed forward, bent his right leg, and held Shanghai Wanner in his arms. With one hand supporting her shoulder and the other hand supporting her slender waist, he firmly held her in his hands. There was a burst of cheers and applause, but no one knew who they were cheering for. The winner was, of course, the Inner Palace team, but almost everyone felt that the most glorious one was the White Horse Temple and the handsome monk of the White Horse Temple. Shanghai Wanner thought that she was going to fall miserably and become the laughingstock of others, but she didn't expect that the expected fall didn't come. When her consciousness cleared, she realized that she was lying in a pair of strong arms. In front of her was an outrageously handsome man's face. He smiled at her and said, "Shengguan Daizhao, are you all right?" Shanghai Wanner had never been hugged by a man in her life. In her memory, even her father, Shangguan Tingji, had never hugged her before. Not long after she was born, her grandfather, Shangguan Yi, was executed because he had offended Empress Wu. Her father, Shangguan Tingji, was also killed. At that time, her mother, Madame Zhang, was banished to the palace where the concubines below Jiu lived as a slave. She grew up there. When she was 14 years old, she was put in an important position by Empress Wu because she was intelligent and good at writing. She was put in charge of the imperial court, and from then on, her status skyrocketed. For so many years, she grew up in the palace and lived in the palace. Even when she was in charge of culture, the people she came into contact with were famous poets and scholars of the court. They were all old men. She had never come into contact with a man, let alone being hugged by a man like this. Wanner was 25 years old this year, but in terms of feelings, she was more innocent than a 12 or 13-year-old girl. She was like a blank piece of paper. When she realized that she was being hugged by a man, Shangguan Daizhao was so embarrassed that her whole body went limp. Yang Fan asked again, "Is Shangguan waiting for the imperial edict safe and sound?" I'm fine." Shanghai Wanner finally came to her senses, and 2 blushes climbed up her cheeks. Princess Taiping walked over and said with a straight face, "Presumptuous! Monk, you are so rude. Let go of Shangguan Daizhao." Yang Fan then realized that he was still holding Shanghai Wanner. Shanghai Wanner straightened her back and stood up from his arms. Her face was red, and she stammered, He did it to save me. There is no need to blame him." Ha ha! Suddenly, a burst of wild laughter rang in their ears, startling the 3 of them who had their own thoughts. Yang Fan turned his head and saw Xue Huai running in front of him, laughing wildly. 17, you're really good. I'm going to hold a celebratory feast for you and celebrate without restraint. Ha ha! Chapter 133. That night, the pagoda forest of White Horse Temple was ablaze with flames, causing the pagodas to flicker with red light. It was a spectacular sight. The original abbot of White Horse Temple, Master Sanshan, gazed in the direction of the pagoda forest from afar. He put his palms together and said with a pained expression, "Amitabha, these people have desecrated the place where the ancestors and eminent monks of our temple reside. They have committed grave sins, grave sins." There was a huge fire in the pagoda forest. The logs that had been cut nearby were piled on top, crackling as they burned. There were mats made of cattail grass in the surroundings, and there were soft cushions on the mats. A group of bald monks sat on them, shouting and yelling in high spirits. Beside the huge fire in the middle, there were a few pits dug. There were also fires burning in the pits, but they were not made of firewood. Instead, they were made of high-quality, smokeless beast charcoal. Lamb and dog meat were roasted on top of the charcoal. They were all slaughtered, washed, and put on the rack. As they roasted, they were smeared with all sorts of condiments. A strong fragrance wafted from afar. Priest Ijua grabbed a dog leg and chanted, Amitba. He took a bite of the dog meat and said, Supreme Heavenly Lord of Tai. He drank a mouthful of alcohol. He ate and drank meat several times faster than the others. Shwehuai sat at the head of the table. It was a snowy season, but there was a huge fire in front of him. The hot air blew into his face and made him feel hot, so he still took off his monk robe and revealed his chest. This guy was probably a bit of an exhibitionist. He liked to show off his muscles when he had nothing better to do. The light from the fire dyed his bald head and chest red. He could not hide the joy on his face. Come, come, let's have another drink. Today, White Horse Temple has shown its face in front of the Empress, the foreign envoys, and all the civil and military officials. The sumo wrestling competition has been won by Princess Taiping's residents for 3 years in a row, but this year it belongs to me, ha ha ha, Shwehuai said proudly. Although we lost the sumo wrestling competition, White Horse Temple has never participated in the past. This is our first time participating. How about it? How about it? 17th Lang threw 5 balls in a row and suppressed all the girls. Even the Empress was full of praise. He stole all the glory of the girls. This is called losing with honor. Yes, it's a glorious defeat. Shwehuai blurted out an idiom, feeling even happier in his heart. All the monks immediately began to flatter him, saying things like Master Shwe's discerning eyes and his wisdom and martial prowess. Shwehuai was happy to hear this and drank a large cup of wine. He said with satisfaction, I've led troops and fought in battles. I've even beaten Gudalu to the point where he had to flee at the sight of the wind. When it came to leading an army, one had to be particular about strict execution of orders and prohibitions. And when it came to a commander, one had to be particular about rewards and punishments. Now, our White Horse Temple has gained the favor of the Empress of Heaven. I am very happy in my heart. Those who have performed meritorious deeds should be rewarded. When everyone heard this, the clamor immediately stopped. Everyone stared at Shwehuai. Shwehuai had always been generous. Now that he was so happy, this reward would definitely be extremely generous. He heard Shwehuai say, in sumo wrestling, 19 took first place and 17 took second place. In Kuju, although we lost, no one could compare to us in the limelight. Although we lost, it was a glorious defeat. In this round, it was 17 who won glory for us. So 17-19. Yang Fan and Chu Kwanga looked at each other and cupped their fists together. Abbot! Shwehuai said, I have a few mansions in the capital that are usually left empty. Occasionally, they are rented out to officials or businessmen who come to the capital for business. I don't care about earning a little bit of money. Now that the 2 of you have helped me gain face and I have received the Empress reward, I can't mistreat the 2 of you. The 2 of you 1 house each. As soon as he finished speaking, the young novice monk, Jixing, handed over 2 house deeds. Yang Fan and Chu Kwanga were shocked. Abbot, this gift is too heavy. Shwehuai waved his hand and said, Hee. I want to reward you, but the gift is too light. With my status, how can I take it out? You can just accept it. Also everyone else. Hong Lu hurriedly said, Abbot, as you can see, that Xiaoxiao man is like a dragon on the court. She's not easy to deal with. I had to use all my strength to keep her busy. Otherwise, Brother 17 wouldn't have been able to score 5 goals in a row so easily. Shwehuai glared at him and scolded jokingly, I have eyes, so of course I can see. I don't need you to show off. The rest of you, 100,000 coins each. Hong Lu, Hongi, 150,000 coins each, ha 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 ha. Taoist Iju gulped and asked embarrassedly, Abbot, what about the money? Shwehuai glared and said, How can I move so much money? Tomorrow morning, Go see Sanshan monk and pay from the temple's incense money. In the distance, Master Sanshan, who was gazing at the firelight in the pagoda forest and smelling the fragrance of meat, suddenly sneezed. A young monk beside him said in a hurry, "Master, it's cold outside. You should go back and rest." Sanshan monk sighed and walked back to the meditation room dejectedly. In the pagoda forest, Yang Fan took a bite of the steaming, charred, tender dog meat and said to Shuai, "Abbot, we came out on top in today's fight. Kuju's strategy was right, and we also stole the limelight. However, tomorrow's fight may not be as we wish. The Imperial Army's Kuju is the strongest team in the Tang Dynasty, but they still lost to the Tufan in previous competitions. As for us, we're already at a disadvantage against the Imperial Army." Shui Huai waved his hand. "You don't need to say anything. I understand. There are 3 competitions in total, and I've already won 2 of them. That's enough. Haha! Tomorrow's victory will most likely be from the Tufan people again. Others won't be able to do anything. Don't worry, go ahead and fight tomorrow. It doesn't matter who wins or loses. That's why I'm holding this celebration feast today." Hearing this, Yang Fan and Chu Tiange secretly heaved a sigh of relief, secretly happy. If Shui Huai forced them to steal the limelight one day, it would be too much for them. If Shui Huai used this reason to forbid them from entering the Imperial Army, Chu Kuanga's lifelong dream would be hard to realize, and it would be extremely difficult for Yang Fan to get close to Qiushenji. Everyone let go of their worries and drank to their heart's content. Because tomorrow's outcome was no longer a concern, no one restricted their drinking capacity. Chu Kuanga, in particular, drank to his heart's content after his dream of several years had been fulfilled. Only Yang Fan lowered his head and drank, thinking to himself, "After tomorrow's matter, entering the Imperial Army is already a done deal. It won't be difficult to get close to Qiushenji. However, I still need Shanghai, or to find out Miao Shinka's whereabouts. How can I get Miao Shinka's whereabouts from her? Recently, although I've been entering the palace frequently, it's difficult to get in touch with her. With her status, it's really difficult to get in touch with her alone. Once I enter the Imperial Army, I won't have a chance to enter the palace anymore. I have to find an opportunity to make my move as soon as possible." On the 3rd day of the Upper Prime era, the Emperor and Empress Dowager arrived at the Longwu Army's camp with their palace concubines, servants, foreign envoys, and civil and military officials to watch the bow fencing competition. The Longwu Army was the only all-cavalry unit in the Imperial Army, and bow fencing required high horsemanship. Therefore, the Longwu Army had the most soldiers who were good at bow fencing, and they also had the largest bow fencing field in Luoyang. However, the bow fencing members of the Imperial Army were selected from the best of the best, and most of them were not from the Longwu Army. Those who served as generals in other Imperial Army units naturally had as many opportunities to ride horses as those in the Longwu Army. Moreover, they had more free time to do bow fencing, so their bow fencing skills were better than most people in the Longwu Army. On the field, there was a goal at each end. The goal was made of wooden frames and was 5 feet apart. It was much smaller than the modern goal, so there was no need for anyone to guard the goal. The competition was divided into 6 periods, and each period used an incense stick. It lasted about 10 minutes, and the field had to be changed after each period. Because of the intensity of the competition, 1 or 2 horses had to support the entire competition. Towards the end, it was inevitable that the horses would be exhausted and affect the contestants' performance. Therefore, horses had to be changed for each competition. The high platform used by the Imperial Army commander to inspect the 3 armies naturally became a stage for the Empress Dowager and the Emperor, as well as the various officials, nobles, and concubines. The high platform had long since been covered with a red carpet and surrounded on 3 sides, leaving only the side facing the bow fencing field open. The Emperor and Wu Zetian sat in the middle. However, everyone was only looking at Wu Zetian. Li Dan was just a decoration. Everyone knew that even if Empress Wu didn't remove Li Tang's orders and continued to wield power as the Empress Dowager, he would still be a decoration. No one paid any attention to him. The emperor of the Tang dynasty was also very conscious of this. Perhaps the fact that his two brothers and many members of Li Tang's imperial family had been killed had frightened him. He was unbelievably humble and docile. He was constantly paying attention to his mother's expression. He didn't dare to sit until Wu Zetian sat, and he didn't dare to speak until Wu Zetian spoke. His cautious demeanor was even more casual than the eunuchs by Wu Zetian's side. This kind of mother and son could be considered as a weirdo. Although it was said that the royal family had no family ties, they still had to put up a front in front of their subjects. However, in front of this mother and son, they didn't even bother to put up a front. The officials who were loyal to Li Tang saw the emperor's appearance and couldn't help but feel even more depressed. In the past 2 years, only 3 teams were qualified to participate in the bow fencing competition: the Tibetan team, the Uyghur team, and the imperial army of the Tang dynasty. Due to the tense relationship between the Turks and the Tang dynasty in recent years, they hadn't come to pay homage for a long time, let alone participate in the bow fencing competition. The White Horse Temple's participation in the tournament was not a bad thing. They would draw lots to select their opponents, and there was a 2/3 chance that they would be matched against either the Tubo or the Uyghurs. This way, they would be able to fight on behalf of the Tang imperial army and deplete their opponent's strength. If they drew the imperial army of the Tang dynasty, the competition would not be too tragic. Every year, there would be many people who were injured and fell to the ground. The results of the drawing were out. The first match, White Horse Temple versus Uyghur, Chapter 134. Yang Fan and the others were preparing seriously. Even though they did not care about winning or losing, they still hoped to show their strength to the best of their ability. This was to prevent the Uyghurs from looking down on the Tangs and to fight for a better chance for the imperial army. Even though they had not spent many months with the imperial army and were close to each other, once outsiders were involved, they would still feel a sense of common enemy. The first requirement for polo was the horse. If a horse did not listen to one's commands, did not have enough horsepower, and was not agile enough, the rider would still be limited by the horse. If they were up against a weak team, they could still show off their prowess like Yang Fan did at the Luo River. However, if they were up against the best team in the world, it would be impossible. Secondly, it also required excellent horse control skills. The ball was sometimes left and sometimes right, sometimes front and sometimes back on the field. Without good horse control skills, you could only chase after the ball and run around the field. No matter how good your horse was, it was useless. Next was the mastery of the ball and teamwork. This sport was passed down from the Tubo Empire. It was originally invented by the cavalry when they were bored. Therefore, it became a sport to test and train the cavalry's ability to cooperate with each other. Therefore, the overall strength of the team was equally important as the individual's ability to control the ball. The Uyghurs were a horse-riding people. Their riding and archery skills were not inferior to the Tubo Empire. Seeing that the other side was also preparing, Chu Kuanga tightened his horse's belly and whispered to Yang Fan, "Be careful later. Some movements are very dangerous when hitting the ball. Be careful not to get hurt." Yang Fan nodded. Woo, woo, woo. Dozens of bugles were raised high and sounded at the same time. The sound of war drums rumbled, and as the sound of the bugles entered everyone's ears, the surrounding generals and soldiers immediately cheered. The game began. The announcer threw the red polo ball high up. All the riders on both sides squeezed their horses' bellies, shouted, and rushed at the ball at the same time. After all, the Uyghurs were people who rode horses. Even though the difference between speed and slowness was not that obvious in such a short distance, it was very obvious from a high platform that the Uyghurs were charging forward at a speed that was faster than the White Horse Temple's troops. On the White Horse Temple side, Chu Kuanga's speed was not any slower than that of the Uyghurs. In fact, he was even faster for a moment. However, the two opposing players arrived at the same time. One of them swung his cane to hit the ball, while the other also swung his cane to hit the ball. However, the cane and Chu Kuanga's cane collided in midair. The moment the two sticks collided, the other Uyghur picked up the red ball with his stick and rushed towards the white horse temple team's goal. Yang Fan rushed forward with his horse. He was half a body's length slower than Chu Kuanga. At this time, when he saw the opposing player rushing towards his side with his horse, he immediately pulled the reins. His horse slightly leaned to the side, and he raised the stick in his hand to grab the ball. Pa! A crisp sound rang out as the two staffs collided. Yang Fan's palm went numb. Even though his palm was wrapped in sackcloth, he still had a feeling that he couldn't hold it. Yang Fan couldn't help but be startled. This person had such great strength. The man on the other side felt even more uncomfortable than he did. When the two staffs collided, the speed of his charge was immediately stopped. The ball was no longer under his control, and it rolled away. Hongyi rushed up and snatched the ball. "Haha, it's mine!" Hongyi perked up and was just about to dribble the ball forward when several opposing players followed up and intercepted the ball. At this time, Chu Kuanga rushed back on his horse and fought with Yang Fan, who was rushing forward. In the beginning, relying on Chu Kuanga and Yang Fan's excellent skills, coupled with the spirit of Hong 1 and Hong 6, they were able to compete with the other side. The two sides fought back and forth, and the red ball only lingered in the middle of the line. No one could do anything to the other. However, this situation only lasted for half an hour. The other side's men and horses were completely spread out, and the red ball spread out to a larger and larger area. Yang Fan and Chu Kuanga found it difficult to fight alone. With just the two of them, it was inevitable that they would be in a difficult situation. The overall strength of the other side was far greater than the monks of the White Horse Temple. The other monks could only follow behind the other side and eat dirt. The score began to pull apart. 1-0, 2-0, 3-0. In the fourth quarter of the game, Yang Fan intercepted a sharp attack from the opponent and immediately passed it to Chu Kuanga, who was riding back to support. Chu Kuanga immediately turned his horse around and attacked the opponent's goal. Yang Fan also immediately rushed forward to support him. Several defenders of the Uyghurs rushed up to intercept. Chu Kuanga broke through two lines of defense in a row. When he felt that he could not continue, he quickly glanced and saw that Yang Fan had already plugged in from the sidelines. He wanted to pass the ball to him. As soon as he moved, the opposing players noticed his intentions. Two Tubo players suddenly stabbed in from the side. Their horses were extremely fast, and by the time they arrived in front of Chu Kuanga, they seemed to be unable to stop the charge of the war horses. The three war horses neighed and collided heavily with each other. At the same time, the elbows of the two Uyghurs were like two large hammers, slamming heavily into Chu Kuanga's ribs. Chu Kuanga was experienced after all. As soon as the two of them approached, he felt that something was wrong. He took a deep breath, and the muscles in his chest and abdomen immediately contracted, becoming as taut as iron. With two muffled sounds, Chu Kuanga's body swayed twice, but he did not fall off the horse. The two Uyghurs straightened up on their horses, and a trace of surprise flashed in their eyes. If it were an ordinary person, both sides of his ribs would have been broken by the collision, but the big Tang man in front of them seemed to be fine. Although this small action was concealed by the galloping horses and their robes fluttered when they collided, it could not be hidden from the other people on the field. Although the skills of Hongyi and Honglu were inferior to these Uyghurs, they were not completely powerless to fight back. Chu Kuanga dribbled the ball forward, and Yang Fan supported him from the sidelines. When the Uyghurs all returned to defend, they had already rushed to Chu Kuanga's side. The small actions of the two Uyghurs were seen by them, and the two immediately flew into a rage. Hongyi cursed, "Motherf ***, you guys are playing dirty." The group of hooligans immediately shouted and cursed. The two sides were cursing endlessly, and the game was forced to end. However, The other side insisted that it was a galloping horse that could not stop and crashed into it. At this time, there were not too many strict rules in the bow-throwing competition, so there was really no way to deal with the other side. In the end, they could only nullify this section of the game and replace it with incense. Yang Fan asked with concern, "Brother Chu, how are you?" Chu Kwanga took a deep breath, and his ribs were aching. He shook his head and said, "It's not a big deal, I can still play." Yang Fan said, "Good. Brothers, get on the horses." Hung waved to the group of bald monks behind him, and his eyes revealed a fierce light. The group of ruffian monks understood tacitly, and each of them tightened their face and got on their horses with a murderous look. The Uyghurs saw their expressions and were not afraid at all. Some of them even spat heavily to show their disdain. After the game resumed, a fierce scuffle began. Hong Lu clenched his teeth, raised his horse, and charged forward. When he was still 6 feet away from the vermilion ball, he raised the staff in his hand high up, concentrated his energy into his dantian, and shouted, "Bang!" Whoosh! Suddenly, Hong Lu pretended to go straight for the red ball, and the staff in his hand swung down hard. A Uyghur man who had just turned around on his horse hurriedly dodged and hid in the stirrup. The staff whistled past, and the man's hat was blown away. A piece of skin on the top of his head was scratched, and blood splashed all over his face. "Mother of **, don't you have eyes?" A few of the Uyghurs cursed. Hong Lu shouted back, "Mother of **, I was hitting a ball. Who knew that blind donkey would hit my staff?" As soon as the fight started, the other side also became angry. Hung had just rushed in front of the red ball when one of the opposing players hit him with his staff. The staff drew an arc and did not hit the red ball, but hit Hung's calf bone instead, and the staff broke with a crack. Hung screamed and fell off his horse, holding his calf and wailing. The doctor rushed over, and after a brief examination, announced that Hung's calf was fractured, and hurriedly ordered 2 soldiers to carry him away. As soon as the fight started, the audience also started to make a ruckus. At first, knowing that the Empress and the Emperor were present, the soldiers still knew to restrain themselves. But when they saw the fight on the field, they couldn't care less. Many of them covered their mouths and cursed loudly. Bastards! How despicable! Ghosts that are worse than dogs and pigs. Uyghur slaves that eat dog intestines. This was the territory of the Tang dynasty, and more than 90% of the audience were soldiers of the Tang dynasty. Needless to say, it was the soldiers of the Tang dynasty cursing the Uyghurs. For a moment, the people of the Tang dynasty were cursing the Uyghurs. Emperor Li Dan glanced at Wu Zetian uneasily. Wu Zetian sat calmly on the rope bed, her expression unchanged. She looked at the field with a peaceful smile on her face. In the third row, a few Uyghur envoys twisted their fat bodies uncomfortably, pretending that they didn't hear the tide-like curses. After Hong Lu was carried off the field, Ma Chiao, who was sitting on the bench, was the first to stand up and shouted, "I'll go." Yang Fan looked at him deeply, smiled, and said, "Okay, you go." Ma Chiao was wild with joy. He immediately led a war horse over, flipped over, and jumped on its back. He pulled the reins a few times, grasped the staff that was handed to him, and rode into the field. Yang Fan warned, "Be careful, don't get hurt." Ma Chiao nodded heavily. He knew that his skills were limited, but he would definitely play seriously today, use all his strength, and perform to the best of his ability. Yang Fan raised his hand to appease the angry brothers who had gathered around and said in a deep voice, "Don't quarrel. If he wants to play dirty, then we'll play dirty with him. However, we can't let others gossip about us, understand?" "Understood." The monks nodded with all their might. Their faces were ferocious and their eyes were fierce. Many of them regretted not bringing a few bricks and a few bags of lime to the field. Shanghai Wan turned her body slightly and covered her mouth with her sleeve. She smiled at Princess Taiping and said, "Lingyue, this year's bow fencing competition in Shangyuan is going to be interesting." Chapter 135. Princess Taiping saw that both sides were fighting fiercely. One side had a fracture, and the other side had a disfigured face. Yang Fan was the main offensive player of the White Horse Temple team. He was always in front. If he was not careful, he would inevitably. She felt nervous for no reason. After listening to Shanghai Wan Er's words, she did not come back to her senses for a while. She blurted out, "What did you say was interesting?" Shanghai Wan Er said sweetly, "In previous years, although there were some small tricks, it has never been so intense. This year's Shangyuan dynasty is really interesting." She thought for a moment and said with a smile, "It's not just today. From the beginning, it has been very interesting." Princess Taiping's sumo champion for 3 years in a row was taken by 2 monks from the White Horse Temple. In the last game, the glory of our inner team was also taken by them, and today. Shanghai Wana looked back at the field and said with a smile, "Today is even funnier. For all these reasons, it seems that the 17th master of the Great Hall is involved. This person is really interesting. This year's Shangyuan dynasty is really interesting." Hearing this, Princess Taiping suddenly remembered that she seemed to have said the same thing. She suddenly thought of that night the day before yesterday, thought of that huge lantern tree, thought of that pair of man and woman sitting on the 100-feet flower leaves of the lantern tree, thought of that unemotional kiss. For a moment she was somewhat absent-minded. At this time, the scene on the field could only be described as tragic. The bow-beating competition had evolved into a full martial arts competition. Both sides used their hands and feet, and screams came one after another. For the Uyghurs, although they were rough and barbaric, they were more adept at using reasonable collision techniques. They could openly dismount many monks from the White Horse Temple. The means that the monks of the White Horse Temple usually used in the past could not be used here, because it was an obvious violation of the rules. In a short period of time, they were punished countless times. However, their violations also injured the members of the Uyghurs. Although they could be replaced, the level of the people they replaced was obviously slightly inferior. Although the people of the White Horse Temple were not good at reasonable collisions, Yang Fan and Chu Kuanga were not. This was especially true for Yang Fan. He was not good at charging and killing in military formations, but his personal martial arts were outstanding. He was suitable for this kind of situation. Yang Fan swung his stick out, and the ball was intercepted by one of the opposing players. Behind him, a Uyghur rider rushed over and pretended to be unable to snatch the ball. His stick went straight for Yang Fan's calf. Yang Fan's staff hit empty air. His face was dejected. He looked up to the sky and shouted, "What a pity!" At the same time, the stick in his hand slipped out of his palm and slipped back. At the same time, his feet stepped forward in the stirrups. This action was like an exaggerated action of a good ball being destroyed. No one could say anything wrong about it. But as soon as he moved his legs forward, the Uyghur man's stick hit empty air. Yang Fan's stick slipped back and bounced out like a poisonous snake. Everyone could see clearly that the Uyghur man seemed to have hit Yang Fan's stick. The stick slipped back. It was not held tightly, so the force was not strong, but it hit the Uyghur's nose. His sharp and straight nose was immediately bent. Blood flowed from his nose. The Uyghur let out a blood-curdling scream and fell down from his horse. The crowd of generals on the sidelines cheered, "Good!" "Huh!" Yang Fan turned his head and pulled the reins of his horse. He looked at the Uyghur man rolling on the ground with a puzzled look. He even scratched his head and looked confused. As a result, the Uyghur man on the other side wanted to make a reasonable collision. But when Yang Fan circled his horse, he barely moved half of his horse's body. The Uyghur man rushed past him. The hoof of his horse was tripped by Yang Fan's horse, and he fell to the ground with a loud crash. On the grandstand, Princess Taiping sneered and said softly, "Little slippery fellow, so treacherous." Shanghai Wanner could not help but smile. On the other side, Chu Kuanga spurred his horse forward and waved his stick. With a kacha sound, the stick collided with a Uyghur's stick and broke into 4 pieces. The polo rolled to the side. Chu Kuanga's hand seemed to be unable to retract the broken stick in time, and it flew into the air. A Uyghur man who was chasing closely behind him managed to catch up. Half of the wooden staff struck his mouth. The man did not even have the chance to make a sound before his lips were smashed into mush. His upper and lower front teeth flew out without a trace. Good. The onlookers rubbed their fists and cheered again. Xue Huai saw that his men were beaten down from their horses, with bruised noses and swollen faces. He could not restrain himself any longer. He took off his purple robe aggressively and wore a pair of trousers. He picked up his Buddha staff and was about to jump onto the field to fight. Taoist Ijua and a few other old and prudent monks hurriedly pulled him back. No matter how the people on the field fought, it could be said that they were playing football. If Xue Huai rushed off the field, it would become an international incident. At this time, seeing Chu Kuanga and Yang Fan go all out and make the other side suffer a big loss, Xue Huai's anger immediately turned into joy. He stepped on the bench and laughed. At this time, both sides no longer had any reserve players who could go on the field. There were very few contestants left on the field. On the White Horse Temple side, only 4 people were left: Yang Fan, Chu Tinga, Ma Chiao, and Hong Lu. Ma Chiao's left arm was hit by the staff and his upper arm swelled up. He endured the pain and did not retreat with his staff. It was also a blessing in his heart. During the fight, he integrated the chopping technique that Yang Fan taught him into the use of the staff. He was able to chop 2 of the opponents off the field. One of them had his shoulder broken by his staff. When he first came on the field and saw the fierceness of the Uyghurs, Ma Chiao was still a little nervous. But now his confidence was greatly boosted. Especially after a series of killings, his blood and qi were completely stimulated. On the battlefield, people who were usually as docile as a virgin or as timid as a white rabbit could also be stimulated to become as fierce as the god of death. Not to mention that Ma Chiao was not a kind person to begin with. It was just that he had not seen such a big scene before. At this time his eyes were red and he was gnashing his teeth. That ferocious look of his made even the fierce Uyghurs afraid. Needless to say, Hong Lu was originally a ruffian. At this time, the left side of his face was bruised, the right brow bone was scratched, and blood covered half of his face. His expression was fierce, but there was a cold smile on his face. His pair of shifty eyes looked straight at the opponent's vital parts, and his hand tightly gripped the staff. It looked like he would take the opportunity to attack fiercely. The opponent was not much. There were only 5 people left, and all of them were injured. The Uyghur envoy could not sit still any longer. He hurriedly stood up and rushed to Empress Wu's side. When he reached Wu Zetian, he said, "Respected Empress Dowager, respected Emperor, the bowing has become a fight. This is too improper. I respectfully request Empress Dowager and Emperor to issue an edict to immediately stop the competition." Li Dan turned her head to look at Wu Zetian. Wu Zetian smiled faintly and said nonchalantly, "It's just a show to coincide with the weather. These kids are all hot-blooded and eager to fight. In the end, they're still young and insensible. We will comply with your request and let them rest." Li Dan immediately nodded her head and said, "Yes, yes. Imperial Mother is right. On such a festive day, these people are too much. Quickly tell them to stop." The Uyghur envoy was overjoyed. A eunuch beside him hurried off the stage and went to pass the edict to the announcer. At this time, Yang Fan and Chu Kuanga's horses crossed each other. A ball was sent out and passed to Ma Chiao's feet. Then, because Yang Fan could not rein in time, he crashed into the side of a Uyghur, knocking him and his horse to the ground. The Uyghur rider fell to the ground and was pinned down by his horse. The hard saddle smashed into his thigh. He immediately cried out in Uyghur language, "My leg is broken!" On the other side, the new club that Chu Kuanga had just replaced was scrapped once again. In an accidental collision with a Uyghur player, the the club broke into two pieces. As a result, the poor Uyghur player was almost broken in two as well. Yang Fan and Chu Kwanga circled half a circle around the field. When the two horses came back and crossed each other, they each raised their palms and struck out with a bang. The Empress has decreed that the competition is stopped, the announcer shouted. Ma Chiao, who had just hit a ball, immediately reined in and looked to the side of the field. The ball rolled past the remaining 3 Uyghur players. The Uyghur captain looked at the remaining 2 players and wanted to cry, but had no tears. From the red flags on the side of the field, they had at least 4 more flags than the White Horse Temple team. However, they only had 3 players left. With such a tragic victory, how could they continue with the next competition? They had originally made careful preparations for this year's bow fencing competition. They originally wanted to compete with the Tubo team, who had won every year. They wanted to win the championship and increase the prestige of the Uyghurs, who knew that the bald donkeys of the White Horse Temple would suddenly appear out of nowhere. This time, everything was for naught. The Tubo envoy Jie Wei sat in the stands. He wore a large furry robe and raised his furry face. He smiled and said to the people around him, "This year's bow fencing competition is really interesting. Haha, in my opinion, both the Uyghurs and the White Horse Temple have no chance in the finals. As for the imperial army of the Tang dynasty, let's not talk about it. This year's bow fencing competition is in the bag of the Tubo." Ha ha ha. The Tubo deputy envoy, Luan Chili, joked. "I wonder what treasure will the Empress of the Tang dynasty take out as a gift for the winner this year?" Immediately, another envoy replied, "As far as I know, it is an agate cup inlaid with gold in the Tang dynasty's palace. It is said to be priceless." The Tubo envoy, Jie Wei, frowned and pretended to be regretful. "Another cup? 2 years ago, we got a white jade cup with gold inlaid with copper. Zan Pu liked it very much and drank with it every day. Last year, we got a lotus petal ruby gold cup. Zan Pu felt that it was unnecessary. If we get another agate cup this year, wouldn't it be even more unnecessary?" The deputy envoy Luan Chili laughed. "So what? Every year, we get a cup made of different materials. In the future, we can gather 7 cups and use them as the national treasure of the Tubo. We can call them the 7 Treasures Cups. Our descendants will know that these 7 priceless cups were won by us from the Tang people." Ha ha ha! The Tubo envoys burst out laughing. Chapter 136. After the competition ended, the onlookers were still in high spirits, cursing and swearing. The Uyghur envoys and military officials in Luoyang, as well as the Uyghur merchants who were invited to watch the competition, were also shouting and ridiculing. Unfortunately, they were alone, and their voices were drowned out by the overwhelming wave of cursing and could not be heard at all. Although the Uyghurs won the match, it was a tragic victory. They were destined to stop at the 3rd place and would not be able to advance further. Empress Wu sternly warned the Tubo and imperial guards not to repeat the story of the White Horse Temple and the Uyghurs. The Tubo people were full of confidence and naturally agreed. The imperial guards also obeyed. The Uyghurs and White Horse Temple people were carried away for treatment. In previous years, there were always people who were injured in fierce fights, so there were imperial doctors waiting outside the field to treat them. However, in previous years, there had never been a case where almost all the players of both teams were injured. Now it was different. More than 20 players were injured. Even the substitutes on both sides were now riddled with injuries. The 2 imperial doctors were understaffed and did not bring enough medicine. They sent people to the imperial hospital to get medicine and doctors, while treating the injured first. Although the people of White Horse Temple were usually arrogant, domineering, and hated by everyone, compared to the Uyghur players, they were still much closer to them. Therefore, the 2 imperial physicians did not realize this and threw their international friends aside and prioritized treating their own compatriots. They first treated the White Horse Temple people with manpower and medicine. The injured Uyghurs could only lie there and moan, but they could do nothing about it. It was almost noon. The Empress Dowager and the Emperor, as well as many other members of the royal family and officials, were going to have lunch. The rest of the people were also going to have lunch. The second round of the competition was set in the afternoon. After everyone had finished their lunch, the doctors from the Imperial Hospital finally arrived. The Uyghur patients finally had their saviors. However, the healing methods of the saviors were sloppy and sloppy. Even the fat chef who was having lunch earlier had his eyebrows furrowed and his eyes narrowed. He used a spoon to knock on the rice bucket, as if he was feeding a pig. This made the Uyghurs so angry that their stomachs hurt. The match started in the afternoon. The strongest team of the Tang dynasty, the Imperial Guards, and the strongest team in the world, the Tubo team. As the Imperial Army was the Imperial Army's own team, the soldiers were even more serious than the previous match. If the previous game was mainly for the fun, then this game was the real high-level bow-striking game. Both sides displayed high standards of horsemanship, bowing techniques, and teamwork skills. It was a true display of strength and beauty. Every lift and every movement, whether it was the flying horses, the intense atmosphere of competition, or the heroic posture of fighting with their staffs, made people feel relaxed and happy, and they cheered loudly. Yang Fan could see that the Imperial Guards had gone all out in this match. They had performed admirably. Whether it was individual performance or teamwork, they were all top-notch. This was the true standard of the Imperial Guards. If they had used this kind of energy to compete with the White Horse Temple, the White Horse Temple would not have been at a disadvantage. They would have been left in the dust. However, compared to the Imperial Army, the Tubo team was a cut above them. To be more precise, the Imperial Army lacked a leader. Just like the role that Yang Fan played in the Kuja competition, they lacked a leader that could be used as a benchmark. This person's role on the court was equivalent to the commander's flag, equivalent to the war drum. He had the effect of inspiring morale and uplifting the hearts of the people. In a weak team, this kind of leading figure would have no effect on the overall outcome. At most, he would be like Yang Fan in the Kuja competition, displaying his individual brilliance. However, in a team that was strong as a whole, his role was immeasurable. Once such a leader joined the team, if the original team was a big hammer, then the flat head of the hammer would become sharp, and the hammer would become a hammer. Xue Na's current role was to be the leader of the entire team. His playing style and tactics were undoubtedly outstanding, and his command of the entire team was extremely brilliant. However, he was after all nearing 40 years of age. He was too steady but lacked drive. He did not have enough initiative on the court. On the other hand, Li Zhan, Yaholi, Di Guangyuan, Wang Tongjiao, Wei Yong, Li Dayan, Lu Yan, Gao Chu, and the others only had their own strengths. They were not very outstanding. Only Huziro's offense was the sharpest, but it was still difficult for him to achieve the effect of a sharp knife. Furthermore, he was slightly restrained by Xue Na's calmness, so the Imperial Army could not break through the tight defensive net woven by the opponent. On the court, Yaholi made a small mistake, and the ball was intercepted by the opponent. The Tubo striker immediately charged forward, and the player who dribbled the ball accurately passed it to the front of his horse. He broke through the Imperial Army's defensive line and dribbled the ball straight towards the goal. The rear guard of the Imperial Army, Wei Yong, Li Dayan, Lu Yan, and Gao Chu quickly returned to defend, and only then did they break his offensive and hit the ball back to the midfield. Both sides fought and collided in the midfield. Although there was some friction, it was all within an acceptable range. However, in terms of the rhythm of the game, it was obvious that the opponent was controlling the game. Princess Taiping slightly frowned her delicate eyebrows, pinched her chin, and said, "If this goes on, the situation of the Imperial Army will not be good." Shangguan Wanner said, "The art of bow striking was originally passed down from the Tubo. It is reasonable that they are a bit more skilled than us. It seems that this year's bow striking will be won by them again. However, speaking of which, the Imperial Army is already much more skilled than last year." Princess Taiping did not answer, but quickly glanced at Yang Fan, who was standing at the side of the field with his arms crossed, watching the game attentively. This kid was originally the best candidate to be the sharp knife. What a pity! If he was on the field, the whole situation would be greatly different. Princess Taiping sighed softly. The game continued on the field. As the Imperial Army was still lacking a strong sharp knife-type player, it was difficult for them to cut through the opponent's defense. Moreover, the offense of the opponent's two forwards was fierce and oppressive. At the end of the first quarter of the game, the Tubo team scored a goal, and both sides had a score of 1 o'clock. At the start of the second quarter, both sides were in the same situation. Although the Imperial Army tried their best, they were still lacking in spirit. In the middle of the game, Huzaro received a pass from Xuana. With the help of Di Guangyuan and Hu Li, the three of them were like a sharp arrow, penetrating the opponent's back line and charging into the goal in a perfect S shape. They scored a goal and equalized the score. However, in the following third and fourth quarter of the game, the opponent scored a goal first and then another 2 goals. During this period, the Imperial Army only scored a goal from Hu Li, and the score became 4-2. In the last 2 quarters of the game, the Imperial Army went from bad to worse, and finally the game ended 7-4. Although the Imperial Army did not have much hope for victory before the game, they still hoped for a miracle. When the game ended as expected, the soldiers were dejected, and the tens of thousands of people around the field were silent. Only some Tubo people near the rostrum, who were invited by the Tubo ambassador, were shouting and cheering for victory. Wu Zetian watched the entire game, but it seemed that she did not care about the outcome. When the game ended, Wu Zetian smiled faintly and said, "The Tubo team is indeed superior. This year, the Tubo team is the champion again. He, come and bring the golden cup." The Tubo ambassador, Jay, stood up from his seat and patted his clothes. He glanced proudly at the nobles of the Tang dynasty and strode to the front of Wu Zetian. He cupped his hands arrogantly and said with a smile, "This official thanks the Empress for the reward. It is not that this official is boasting, but the art of bow striking originated from my country. In the whole world, there is naturally no one who can compete with my bow striking technique." Jay's arrogant words were overflowing with arrogance. All the civil and military officials of the Tang dynasty who were present looked angry, but Jay was proud of himself and did not think much of it. At this time, the palace maid came up with the golden cup. Wu Zetian slightly waved her hand and said lightly, "Reward." "Thank you, Empress Dowager, for the reward," Jia Wei said in a dramatic manner. He flicked his sleeves and took the golden cup. He smiled cheerfully and raised the golden cup high above his head. The Tubo people on the scene immediately let out a burst of enthusiastic cheers. The Tubo ambassador spun 3 rounds on the spot and showed everyone his spoils of war. He was about to turn and leave when he suddenly glanced at the table in front of Wu Zetian. He paused and said, "Empress, next year in Shangyuan, I believe the bow striking competition will still be held. Our Tubo team will definitely have to participate. This official may be presumptuous, but can we first ask the Empress Dowager to specify the prize for next year's reward?" Saying this was a very rude action. Wu Zetian was a little surprised. She couldn't help but raise her eyebrows and ask curiously, "I wonder what item does the ambassador want to use as the prize?" Jay said, "Our Tubo team has won the bow striking competition 3 times in a row. Each time, the prize is a treasured cup. This official saw that the cup on the Empress Dowager's table is exceptionally magnificent, and I like it very much. Since this cup is used by the Empress Dowager, it must be very precious. If this official can win this cup next year and go back, I believe that Zanpu will be very happy." As soon as these words were said, the expressions of all the civil and military officials present changed. Shanghai Wanner was about to scold him when Wu Zetian raised her hand slightly and mimicked their actions. She gently stroked the wine cup on the table and said with a smile, "Ambassador Jay, have you taken a fancy to our Jean O Forever Solid cup?" When Wu Zetian said, "Jean O Forever Solid," she deliberately emphasized her tone. Jay, however, replied, "Exactly. Although Wu Zetian still had a smile on her face, the corner of her eye twitched a few times. Shanghai Wanner, who was familiar with her, knew that the Empress was really angry this time. Jay's words were already a public humiliation to the Tang dynasty. Him specifying the prize for next year's competition to the Empress Dowager was even more disrespectful, especially when Wu Zetian had already pointed out the name of the treasured cup, Jean O Forever Solid. Since it was given such a name, this golden cup had a very important political meaning. Although Jay was not from the Central Plains, he was a Tubo envoy and was well versed in the Central Plains culture. It was impossible for him not to understand the meaning of these words. But he did not hesitate and still wanted to use this cup as a prize. This was not just him being arrogant. It was a deliberate provocation. Wu Zetian gently stroked the golden cup. The cup was made of pure gold, in the shape of a tripod, round and straight. The rim of the cup was carved with inscriptions, and the middle of the cup was carved with the words Jean O Forever Solid. The outer wall was carved with precious flowers, the stamens of which were made of pearls, rubies, and sapphires. On each side of the cup was a pair of deformed dragon ears with precious pearls on the dragon heads. Wu Zetian gently stroked the cup for a moment and slowly raised her head. Her phoenix eyes were filled with anger as she said softly, "Ambassador Jay, are you sure that Tubo will win?" Chapter 137. There was a humble smile on Jay's face as he bowed slightly and said in a deep voice, "Shooting the bow is based on the art of mounted archery. How can the Tang people's mounted archery compare to our nomadic grasslands? Therefore, I am confident that Tubo will still win next year's shooting competition. As long as this competition continues, Tubo will always win." At this point, Jay raised his eyes slightly, and a cold glint like an arrow faintly appeared in his eyes. Below the stage, when the Imperial Army generals heard his arrogant words, they couldn't help but explode with rage. Many of the officials and nobles present gradually understood the underlying meaning of the conversation between the Tubo envoy and Empress Wu. They were not actually talking about shooting the bow. Jay said that shooting the bow was based on mounted archery, and that mounted archery was an important part of military strength. In fact, Jay was referring to the military strength of the two countries. The reason why the two countries were fighting was because of the western regions, and the source was the 4 garrisons of Anqi. The 4 garrisons of Anqi were now a sore point for Empress Wu. In the first year of Emperor Gaozong's reign, Tubo attacked Anqi, and the Tang abandoned the 4 garrisons of Anqi. This was the first time the 4 garrisons of Anqi had fallen into the hands of the Tang dynasty. 5 years later, the Tang dynasty recaptured the 4 garrisons of Anqi, but just 2 years later, they fell into the hands of Tubo again. Another 2 years later, the Tang army recaptured the 4 garrisons of Anqi. 7 years later, the 4 garrisons of Anqi were lost for the 3rd time. This loss had happened 3 years ago, and the imperial court had always been divided on whether or not the 4 garrisons of Anqi should be reclaimed. A group of important officials, led by Di Renjia, believed that the 4 garrisons of Anqi were of little value and that it would be of no benefit to them if they lost them. They suggested that the imperial court give up on the 4 garrisons and focus on managing the country. Empress Wu was more inclined to recapture the 4 garrisons of Anqi. Jay had clearly heard of these disputes in the imperial court. He was using shooting the bow as a metaphor for military strength, expressing his disdain for the military strength of the Tang dynasty. The atmosphere immediately became tense. Wu Zetian's face seemed to be covered with a layer of frost, no longer as calm as before. On the side, Princess Taiping suddenly said, "Jay's words are incorrect. In this competition, you won first place not because the Tang dynasty's military strength is weaker than your country's, but because the military strength of the Tang dynasty's imperial army is weaker than your country's." Jay slightly raised his chin, his straight beard proudly facing Princess Taiping. He said, Your Highness, the strongest force in your country is the imperial army. They were defeated. Doesn't this mean that the Tang dynasty was defeated? Princess Taiping smiled and said, Of course not. She spread her fingers and flicked them gracefully in the air. She said, Slowly, the imperial army is the imperial army. It doesn't represent the Tang dynasty, nor does it represent all the armies of the Tang dynasty. The archers that you send to the Tang dynasty to compete every year are first-class experts selected by the whole country. And the contestants of the Tang dynasty's imperial army are some of the best archers selected from the 16 guards and horses of the North and South Yamen. Do you understand? Shanghai Wan understood Princess Taiping's meaning. She replied, correct. Shooting the bow is in accordance with the season and is a festive occasion. It's not a big deal. Naturally, the Empress wouldn't go to war for it. She would choose first-class experts from all the prefectures in the country to compete with your country in shooting the bow. Shangguan Wan, words were aimed directly at Jay's lyric, which alluded to the Tang's military strength. Jay's lyric said that they were people who lived on horseback and that their horsemanship and archery were superior to the Tang's. Therefore, if the Tang fought them in the western region, there was no way they could win. Shanghai Wan hinted that the Tang dynasty's territory was vast. Elite soldiers and strong generals needed to guard all four sides. It was impossible to mobilize all the elites of the Tang dynasty for a mere 4 towns of Anqi, and you used all the power of the country to take Anqi. Once we gather our elites, you are no match for us. Jay naturally understood her hint. He couldn't help but laugh and said, Oh, since Shangguan Dai Zhao has said so, then I will take out the treasure I just obtained as a wager. Please ask the Empress to gather the first-class archers of your country to compete with us again. What do you think? Wu Zetian frowned slightly. With her status, it was naturally impossible for her to be so serious with Jay. She had gone to great lengths to recruit bow-fighting experts from all over the country. Moreover, with this decree, it was unknown whether or not she would be able to find bow-fighting experts who were more outstanding than the experts from the imperial army. If they competed again, it would be fine if they won, but if they lost, they would lose all face. Wu Zetian had just thought of this when Princess Taiping sneered and said, Why do we need to recruit archers from all over the Tang dynasty? Just pick a few from Luoyang, and it will be enough to defeat you. Hearing this, Jay laughed in surprise and said, Good. Then Jay Chu is willing to compete. After saying this, he placed the golden cup on the table in front of Wu Zetian and took 3 steps back. He bowed respectfully and said, Empress Dowager, Your Highness, please choose the elite soldiers and generals. I am willing to compete again. Please be the witness. No one knows her daughter better than her mother. Wu Zetian knew that her daughter was smart and thoughtful. Since she said this, she must have something to rely on. She could not help but look at Taiping. Princess Taiping stood up and walked to the side of the stage. She stood straight and slightly swept her gaze downward. Tens of thousands of people in the audience saw Princess Taiping walking to the side of the stage. It seemed that she had something to say. The whispers suddenly quieted down. The Tubo people who were still cheering also shut their mouths and looked toward the stage. Princess Taiping raised her voice and shouted, Today, Tubo wins in archery. Because of this, the Tubo envoys laughed that our Tang dynasty has no capable people. I don't agree. The joy of archery is to celebrate with the whole world, to celebrate with the people. It is only a game. Therefore, the imperial army is just some archers chosen from the imperial army. Not to mention that they cannot represent the standard of our Tang dynasty's army. They cannot represent the standard of our Tang dynasty. They cannot even represent the city of Luoyang. Now, Jay Chu is the envoy. With the golden cup given by the Empress as the prize, he wants to fight with our Tang dynasty again. When Princess Taiping said this, she paused for a moment. Gradually, a murderous look appeared between her eyebrows. She slowly looked around the audience and suddenly raised her voice again. There was a faint sound of metal and stone. "Here are the soldiers of the imperial army and the heroes of Dongdu. Is there anyone who is willing to fight with me, Li Lingyue?" "I am willing to fight with the princess. I am willing to fight with the princess." The ones who responded were Xue Na, Di Guangyuan, Huzelo, and the other members of the Forbidden Army. They were already very ashamed of defeating them. Now that they heard Princess Taiping's words, they were even more ashamed to show their faces. A woman was not inferior to a man. How could a dignified man endure such humiliation? Therefore, they all volunteered to fight. In fact, the blood of the tens of thousands of soldiers around the field was already boiling. If there were millions of enemies in front of them at this time, they would also rush up and fight without fear. The problem was that shooting arrows was not a battle, and it was not enough to be hot-blooded. Therefore, the 70,000 soldiers clenched their fists tightly and looked at the front of the stage, breathing heavily. Although they could not respond, the words, "I am willing to fight side by side with the princess," were stuck in their throats, and their young faces were as red as coxcomb-like blood. Princess Taiping's limpid eyes were fixed on one person. That person was on the other side of the field. The wind carried Princess Taiping's voice into his ears. He looked at the noble princess on the stage in surprise. He saw that the princess was also looking at him. Behind him, there were tens of thousands of soldiers, but he knew clearly that Princess Taiping was looking at him. He did not speak, but just fixed his eyes on the stage. Some things were indeed just a game, just like when Ma Qiao generously gave up the ball under his feet because of Lan Yiqing's coquettish grumble. It was not because he was careless, but because the result of this game was meaningless to him. Since that was the case, why didn't he use it to win the beauty's smile? If Yang Fan did not want to become an archery member through this game and achieve his goal, he would not care about a game. But even if it was a game, when it was combined with glory, dignity, and bravery, it was no longer a dispensable game, but a goal worth fighting for. Yang Fan was also a person of the Tang dynasty and also a man of the Tang dynasty. At this moment, his blood was boiling. Chu Kuanga stood not far behind him. He raised his hand and slapped the butt of the dark horse. The dark horse walked towards Yang Fan. When it came to Yang Fan's side, it used its head to rub against Yang Fan's sleeve. Yang Fan looked back at Chu Kuanga, reached out his hand and slapped the saddle and jumped up. This was a good horse. Xue Huai had requested a batch of the best war horses from the army, and this black stallion was the best among the batch of war horses. Its fur was as black as satin, and its limbs were slender and powerful. When Yang Fan rode on the horse, the staff was hanging on the victory hook. Yang Fan took off the staff and held it in his hand like a gun. With one hand holding the reins, his back was straight and his head was raised high. With both of his legs in the stirrups, the fine horse took small steps and galloped to the empty center of the arena. Yang Fan gently pulled on the reins and it stood still. Like its owner, it raised its head high. At this time, the sky was close to dusk. The faint red rays of the sun shone on Yang Fan's handsome face and heroic figure, as if he was a gold-plated bronze statue. Yang Fan gathered his qi in his dantian, and with a voice that resounded through the arena, he shouted, "I am willing to fight side by side with the princess." Princess Taiping stood on the stage and looked at him. A happy smile bloomed on her lips, and it was as bright as spring flowers. Then, a date red horse galloped into the arena. Chu Kuanga also held his staff like a spear, and with a voice like thunder he shouted, "I am willing to fight side by side with the princess." Ha ha ha, bold. Refreshing. I haven't been in the arena for many years, and my hands and feet are itching. I am also willing to fight side by side with the princess. With this sudden laughter, Qiu Shinji stood up and walked down the stage like a fierce tiger. He walked straight to Xue Na. Xue Na quickly cupped his fists and took a step back, giving the yellow horse to Qiu Shinji. Qiu Shinji stroked the mane on the neck of the horse, and without stepping on the stirrups, he jumped on the horse. His movement was vigorous, and it was not inferior to a strong young man. When the imperial army saw that 3 out of 10 places had been taken, they immediately cupped their fists together, and with the most solemn military salute, they knelt down on one knee and solemnly asked Wu Zetian to fight side by side with the princess. "I am willing to fight side by side with the princess." Wu Zetian raised her eyebrows and suddenly laughed. "My son, I will appoint you as the commander today. Everyone here will be under your command. Who else do you want to use? Just name them." Chapter 138. Princess Taiping turned around and bowed to Wu Zetian. "I accept your orders. Mother, just sit down and watch me fight for our Tang dynasty." Princess Taiping turned around and walked down the stage. The servants immediately brought her mount. It was a white horse with a snow-white body. Its flowing mane was like white snow. It looked very handsome. The saddle of the horse was already prepared. 2 maids brought the arrow-sleeved martial arts attire to help her put it on. Her long hair was untied and her hair was pulled into a ponytail. In a short while, the graceful and noble Princess Taiping had turned into the valiant and formidable Hua Mulan. Princess Taiping supported the saddle and mounted her horse. She steadied her body, and with a baseball stick in her hand, she spurred the horse lightly in front of the 10 imperial army players. When she reached Huzalo, she suddenly pulled the reins and stopped. Pointing her baseball stick toward him, she shouted in a tender voice, "You come!" Huzalo's spirit was lifted. He quickly replied, "Yes." He mounted the horse and galloped in the field. He turned the horse around and stood side by side with Qiu Shinji, Chu Kuanga, and Yang Fan. The rest of the generals puffed out their chests and waited for Princess Taiping to call them. Princess Taiping glanced at them and galloped towards the field. The rest of the imperial guards were stunned, their faces turned red. "Your Highness," Di Guangyuan shouted, "are we really that useless?" Princess Taiping held the horse's reins and looked back. She laughed loudly. "Not at all. If you want to win against Tufan, the 5 of us are enough." These words shocked everyone present. A moment later, thunderous shouts resounded through the sky. The generals and soldiers clenched their swords and spears in their hands, raised them high, and shouted in unison, "Mighty! Mighty! Mighty!" The sound lasted for a long time and spread to a very far place. Li Lingyue was a woman and a princess of the Tang dynasty. She brazenly accepted the challenge of the Tufan masters. This action ignited the courage of all the Tang dynasty soldiers. The eyes of the hot-blooded soldiers were bloodshot and their temples were throbbing. If it was not for the fact that this battlefield was not a place for fighting with numbers and courage, they would have rushed forward even if there were millions of enemy soldiers in front of them. Moreover, Li Lingyue did not make 10 people. She dared to challenge the Tufan warriors with only 5 people. Such courage, such boldness, was even more admirable. For a moment, the great vigor of the entire audience caused the Tubo people to look somewhat dejected and their morale to drop. Princess Taiping's action put Jay in a bit of a difficult position. He really wanted to show off his demeanor at this time, to show off the spirit of Tubo and also participate in the battle with 5 people, but he was worried that he would really lose this match. This was originally a dispute that he deliberately provoked, and that would be a great loss of face. After thinking it over, Jay gritted his teeth and thought to himself, "In any case, we've already won a match with 10 people against 10. Now you're the one who's arrogant and insisted on competing with 5 people. If I win against you, it won't be considered me bullying you with numbers." So he waved his hand and ordered his 10 team members to enter the arena. Seeing this scene, the surrounding Tang soldiers immediately booed, causing the 10 Tubo masters to lose some face. Yang Fan, who was holding his stick, looked at the other team members entering the arena. He worriedly said to Princess Taiping, "Your Royal Highness, are we going to compete with only 5 people? There are many experts in the Imperial Army." Qiu Shinji stroked his beard and smiled. "Princess may be a woman, but you are well versed in the art of war." Hee hee, it's 5 against 10. It's really a brilliant plan. Chu Kuanga was surprised. Why do you say that, great general? Chiu Shinji said, can't you see? There was a deep meaning behind the princess's arrangement. Firstly, it was a matter of cooperation. In terms of teamwork, the 10 experts of the Imperial Army had the best rapport with one another. If teamwork was the only thing that mattered, the 10 of them should have been sent out once more. Adding the few of us into the mix would have destroyed the rapport. But now it has been proven that they are still slightly inferior to the Tubo people. If we let too many of them participate in the competition, we will either be unable to form a whole, or we will be attracted by their pace and become their vassals, which will instead affect our performance. Secondly, morale. The battlefield was a wondrous place. It wasn't a matter of who had more people or who was better at fighting that would definitely win. Many times a strategy of favorable terrain, a heavy downpour, could cause an unexpected change in the situation of a battle. We are 5 against 10. In terms of morale, we must be strong while the enemy is discouraged. Its effect may seem invisible, but it is everywhere. Yang Fan looked at Chiu Shinji in surprise. He only knew that Chiu Shinji was a ruthless official, but he did not know that he was really knowledgeable. Just this knowledge alone was extraordinary. No wonder Chiu Shingong, the founding general of the Tang dynasty, had 4 sons, and Chiu Shinji was the most outstanding one. Chiu Shinji said, thirdly, honor. This battle is for the sake of victory, and the other side's 10 people have just fought for 6 rounds, and their stamina is already exhausted. If we were to fight 10 against 10, they would still have a good excuse if we won. But now that we are fighting 5 against 10, if they lose, what else is there to say? Fourthly, the arrangement of 10 people attacking Juju is to attack, defend, intercept, and coordinate with each other. Now that the princess is fighting 5 against 10, I am afraid you will win by surprise. Your Highness is what I said, right? Princess Taiping smiled and said, what the general said is exactly what I am thinking. You are indeed a famous general of the Tang dynasty. But, Princess Taiping said, before thinking about winning, first think about losing. I am fighting 5 against 10. This is also to reserve a way out. Huzello could not help but ask, Princess, what way are we reserving? Princess Taiping covered her mouth and said, I have boasted, but we are fighting 5 against 10. If we win, of course we will be proud. But what if we really lose? After all, we are fighting 5 against 10. If he wins, there is nothing to brag about. In the end, it is me who is being too arrogant. It is not the Tang dynasty that is losing face. When everyone heard this, they were all stunned. Princess Taiping glanced at Yang Fan and ordered, Yang Fan, Huzello, you too will be the vanguard. Both of them looked serious and cupped their fists at the same time. Yes. Princess Taiping said again, Chu Kuanga, you are the center. Yes. Princess Taiping lightly waved her ball cane and said with ease, I and General Chiu will be the left and right inner vanguard, supporting the attack. Chu Kuanga was slightly surprised and said, give up the defense and attack with all our strength? Princess Taiping's jade face turned cold and said in a deep voice, yes, we will concentrate our strength. As long as we get the ball, we will attack with all our strength. The 5 of us are good at attacking, so we will definitely break their defense. If the opponent gets the ball, we will snatch it if we can and intercept it if we can. Once they break into the back, let them go. Princess Taiping glanced at Yang Fan and said, there's no one behind us to stop them. Even if he scores a goal, it will not be glorious. The more goals he scores, the more depressed they will be and the less spirited they will be. Hee hee, I learned this trick from you, Yang Fan. It seemed that Yang Fan's glorious defeat style of playing in Kuju really made the princess depressed for a long time. After the Tubo people entered the field, Princess Taiping considerately suggested that they would only play 3 quarters to determine the winner. The reason was that although the opponent had 10 players, they had played 6 quarters in a row and their physical recovery was limited. so they would inevitably be exhausted. The Tangs were the hosts and would not take advantage of them. However, she did not mention that they only had half of the opponent's players on their side. This move was really beautiful. The Tubo people watching the game on the sidelines were a little ashamed to cheer for their team. Yang Fan, on the other hand, snickered in his heart. This princess was really smart. The opponent might not be able to adapt to the playing style of attacking with 5 sharp knives at the same time, but this kind of playing style with no defense had a big loophole. Once the opponent got used to it, 3 quarters would be over. The game began. The right forward, Huzuro, grabbed the ball. Yang Fan immediately rushed in front of him to the left line of the opponent's camp. This move not only disrupted the opponent's formation, but also attracted some of the opponent's players, creating a condition for Huzuro to dribble the ball forward. Once Huzuro passed the ball to him, he could become the main attacker at any time. The opponent had no choice but to send out 2 members to intercept him. At this time, Chu Kwanga also spurred his horse and rushed to the center line. The 3 of them formed an inverted triangle and rushed into the opponent's front field. Then Princess Taiping and Chioshinji, one on the left and one on the right, also spurred their horses and rushed out. This move was beyond the opponent's expectation. Princess Taiping was a woman, and Chioshinji's hair was gray, and he was not young. They thought that these 2 people would act as defensive players. They did not expect that once the Tangs got the ball, they all became the main attackers and rushed to the opponent's camp together. In this way, Yang Fan, Huzuro, and Chu Kwanga formed an inverted triangle. Chu Kwanga, Princess Taiping, and Chioshinji formed another triangle. They rushed to the opponent at the same time. The opponent's 3 players squeezed toward Huzuro. Huzuro passed the ball to Yang Fan. The 2 players in front of Yang Fan immediately changed from squeezing to snatching. Before they got close, Yang Fan had already passed the ball to Chu Kwanga's feet. Another 2 players blocked Chu Kwanga. Chu Kwanga raised his stick and pretended to pass the ball to Yang Fan. His stick swung out but hit nothing. He quickly took 2 steps forward and suddenly backhanded the ball. The ball was passed backward and hit Chioshinji. With fewer players, they had to try to ensure that their side controlled the ball. If something went wrong, they would pass the ball to other players to reduce the chance of the ball being intercepted. Of course, they all understood this. As soon as Chioshinji saw the ball flying towards him, he suddenly shouted and kicked the stirrups with both of his legs. The originally light horse, Stance, suddenly turned into a gallop. The warhorse suddenly sped up and quickly got rid of a player on the other side. After catching the ball, the horse did not slow down but rushed to the opponent's rear defensive line at a faster speed. At this time, Yang Fan and the other 2 vanguards had restrained many players on the opponent's side. When the opponents saw Chioshinji suddenly become the vanguard, they were shocked and hurried to help. At this time, Princess Taiping had rushed to the opponent's half of the field. Chioshinji bypassed 2 players on the opponent's side with an S-line and hit the ball to the front of Princess Taiping's horse. The ball fell 3 feet in front of Princess Taiping's horse. Princess Taiping and Yang Fan, who was not far away, and 3 players on the opponent's side rushed to grab the ball at the same time. Princess Taiping arrived first and hit the ball diagonally in front of the opponent's goal with just 1 stick. Chioshinji rushed over at the right time. After Chioshinji passed the ball, the horse did not slow down at all. It was like an arrow leaving the bow. When 2 players on the opponent's side just formed a pincer attack on him, Chioshinji passed through them, leaving only a straight ponytail, which was caught by them for a moment. The ball hit by Princess Taiping only bounced once after it fell to the ground. Chioshinji shouted loudly, and the ball's stick turned into a shadow. The ball was hit by his stick and flew towards the opponent's goal with a whistling sound. A defender on the opponent's side rushed to intercept the ball. When he waved his stick, the ball went straight into the ball pocket. The first goal! The Tangs were fighting 5 against 10, but they scored 1 goal first. And the goal was scored by Chioshinji, the general of the Jinwu Guards, who was over 60 years old. Chapter 139. Mighty. On the military field, tens of thousands of soldiers burst into thunderous cheers, and the sound of mighty resounded through the sky again. Princess Taiping's 5 people's all-out attack was indeed very sharp. Of course, this not only required their superb ball skills and horsemanship, but also required them to have the most accurate judgment of the ever-changing situation on the field. These 5 people on the field happened to have this ability. When Qiu Shinji was young, he was one of the best generals in the Tang Dynasty's archery field. When Li Shimin introduced archery in the Tang Dynasty, Qiu Shinji was once appointed to Tubo to learn how to play polo. He was one of the first people to popularize this game in the Tang Dynasty. At that time, he repeatedly won the championship in the archery field and was rewarded by Emperor Taizong of Tang for this. Chu Kuanga was one of the most outstanding generals in the archery field of the second generation of the Tang Dynasty. If he hadn't just made a name for himself in the archery field and been expelled from the military camp because he offended his superior, he would have been the #1 player in the archery field of the Tang Dynasty. This time the imperial army of the Tang Dynasty participated in the tournament. He would certainly be the leader, and the result of the last game might not have been the same. Yang Fan, on the other hand, had played rat-tan-ball on the beach of the South China Sea since he was a child. He could control the light rat-tan-ball freely, so it was naturally easy for him to control the polo ball. Although he was not as experienced as Qiu Shinji and Chu Kuanga in terms of horsemanship and overall view, Yang Fan was still above them in terms of ball skills. So once Yang Fan became familiar with archery, with his superb ball control skills, it was enough to make up for his shortcomings in other aspects. In the past, Ashina Huzuro was the #1 attacker in the archery field of the Imperial Army. His style was the most fierce, so these 4 people could be said to be the best at archery. Princess Taiping was also very good at horsemanship and ball skills. This princess of the Tang Dynasty was a good athlete. Her archery level, even in the archery field of the Imperial Army, could be ranked in the upper middle position. Moreover, she was a woman and a princess, so no matter from which aspect, the Tubo people couldn't fight with her too fiercely. If they really hurt her, the consequences would be unimaginable. Although the Tubo envoys repeatedly provoked Wu Zetian, they didn't really want to make trouble with the Tang Dynasty. Therefore, Princess Taiping, who had 10% of her fighting power, could also exert 120% of her power in this game. Moreover, her identity as a woman and her noble status had an exceptionally strong motivating effect on all the players participating in the game. The game continued, and by the end of the second quarter, the score between the 2 sides was already 6-5. In just 2 quarters of the game, both sides had scored a total of 11 goals. From this, one could see how intense this all-out attack was. 6-5. The Tangs had 6 points, and the Tubo had 5 points. 10 people against 5, and the other side had a woman and an old man. But they were actually at a disadvantage. The Tibetan envoy, Jay, could not bear it any longer. As soon as the second quarter of the game ended, he rushed to the sidelines as if his boat was on fire. He shouted in Tibetan and reprimanded all the players severely. He did not care about the demeanor of an envoy at all. Hasero looked at the roaring Jay and said softly, "Jay is angry." Princess Taiping picked up the water bag and drank some water. She pursed her lips and said softly with a smile, "I'm afraid he won't be angry. The more he forces the Tubo team, the more powerful he will be for us." Yang Fan said cheerfully, "That's right. We have fewer people. I'm afraid that they will be on guard and wait for an opportunity to make a move. If we drag it out, we will have more openings. If that happens, I'm afraid we will lose. Now that Jay is angry if under his pressure, the Tubo team is forced to go all out to attack us. Hey! Hee hee." Qiu Shinji smiled slightly. His pair of deep tiger eyes narrowed as if he was taking a nap. He said leisurely, "If they compete with us in attacking, how can a piece of rusty iron win against well-tempered steel?" The third and final quarter of the game was even more intense. The Tubo team was behind by 1 goal, and this was the last game. This realization made all the Tubo team members go crazy. With red eyes, they fiercely pounced on the Tubo team. The few Tubo people at the sidelines shouted for them hoarsely in Tubo language. At the sidelines, the sound of the war drums was like bursts of thunder, shaking everyone's eardrums. The arms of a man beating the drums were weak. As long as his hands slowed down a little, someone would jump up to replace him. The people could be replaced, but the drums could not stop. The war drums rumbled, and all the soldiers were cheering for their own people. The number of people was 5 to 10, and the score was 6 to 5. This score was unacceptable to the Tubo team, who had always thought that they were invincible. Therefore, at the start of the last quarter of the game, they were like wolves and tigers. They used the same strategy as the Tang team, pressing forward with all their strength to attack. With the full strength of the top 10 players, how could they not catch up with this ball, or even surpass the Tang team? However, when they met on a narrow path, using offense against offense, the slightest difference was enough to determine victory or defeat. Although there were only 5 people on the Tang dynasty side, 4 of them were more powerful than the Tubo team. Princess Taiping was a little less skilled than them, but they were afraid of hurting her. Therefore, they were restrained when fighting for the ball. Although there were 10 people on the Tubo team, the horses galloped on the field. 3 to 5 horses were enough to control a large area. After the Tubo team adopted the strategy of all-out attack, their advantage in numbers could not be used at all. Moreover, at this time the Tang dynasty was already in the lead. Although it was only 1 goal, their mentality was completely different. Being in the lead was an unprecedented record for the Tang dynasty team. Secondly, it was a record of 5 against 10, which was enough to laugh at the world. Therefore, Princess Taiping and the others were not anxious at all. Now, as long as they got the ball, they would use their exquisite ball control skills and superb horsemanship to try their best to keep the ball for as long as possible. As the game was about to end, both sides actually had not scored a goal. This situation formed a sharp contrast with the frequent goals scored in the first 2 quarters. Seeing that the game was about to end, the incense stick was about to burn out. The cheers of the Tang dynasty soldiers celebrating the victory came one after another. Jay could not sit still and ran to the side of the field again to shout. Hearing his shout, the Tubo team's offensive became more rapid. As a result, the pace of the attack became more chaotic. Princess Taiping cleverly cut off one of their balls and immediately passed it to Yang Fan. After dribbling the ball, Yang Fan did not directly rush to the opponent's goal. Instead, he circled to the outside field and then cut to the end line. His plan was to attack if he could, and if he could not, he would try to delay as much time as possible. How could the Tubo team let him do that? They immediately outflanked him. Seeing that several pursuers were approaching, Yang Fan shouted and waved his stick to pass the ball to Huzuro on the other side. Huzuro had been slightly injured in the scramble. The corner of his eye was scratched and there was a trace of blood on his face, but he still insisted on playing. Seeing that Zhu Qiu was in front of his horse, Huzuro immediately caught the ball and sped up his horse. He made a posture of rushing to the goal. After successfully attracting several opposing players to surround him, he passed the ball to Chu Kuanga. Chu Kuanga rushed forward with the ball. Out of the corner of his eye, he glanced at Yang Fan's position and suddenly flicked the ball. The ball drew an arc and fell to the right in front of the goal. Yang Fan's horse had just emerged from the encirclement of the opponent's 2 horses. Seeing this scene, he immediately urged his horse to pounce. At this time, the sky was already dark. Countless torches were lit around the field. The black horse that Yang Fan was riding was like a black dragon. It ran faster and faster, getting closer and closer. It shook off the opposing players who were constantly trying to intercept and fight for the ball. Like a black shadow, it was the first to pounce in front of Zhu Qiu. 3 Tubo players, respectively, flanked him from the left front, left back, and behind him. It was only a few centimeters away. Yang Fan did not stop for a moment and directly kicked the ball with his stick. Ah! In the opponent's desperate cries, the ball flew out a moment before them. Boom! The four horses crashed heavily into each other. Although the black horse that Yang Fan was riding was divine, it could not withstand the impact of three horses at the same time. With a sad neigh, it fell to the ground. The referee waved the flag and shouted loudly, "Sure, the black horse fell." At the moment when the horse fell, Yang Fan's legs left the stirrups. He nimbly stepped on the horse's back and jumped up. Sure, the vermilion polo shot into the goal and lifted the net up. Sure! The cheers that had been stuck in the throats of the soldiers for a long time broke through the air and formed a huge wave of sound, startling Sheng Guanwer, who was watching intently. Only then did she feel a faint pain in her palm. It turned out that while watching the game, she had unknowingly immersed herself in it. With the Empress by her side, she could not cheer as loudly as the soldiers. Unknowingly, she had clenched her fists so tightly that she did not even notice that her nails had cut into her palm. This heart-shattering cheer shook even Wu Zetian. A joyful smile appeared on her face as she calmly said, "He, Lingyu, Shinji, and that little guy, not bad at all." Mighty, mighty, mighty. When Yang Fan landed, he deliberately staggered. He did not want people to know how agile he was. But who cared? He who had scored the last goal was already the greatest hero in the eyes of all the soldiers present. Even though he had fallen to the ground in a heroic manner, he was still the greatest hero in the hearts of the soldiers. The imperial soldiers watching the game went crazy. They even forgot that the Empress Dowager and the Emperor were present. One by one, they rushed down from the stands, cheered, and rushed into the field. They lifted Yang Fan, who had scored the last goal, and threw him into the air over and over again. Only then did Shanghai Wan let out a long sigh, because she had held her breath for a long time. Her face was flushed. Mighty, mighty, mighty. With each shout, Yang Fan was thrown higher and higher. Princess Taiping rode her horse closer and pulled the reins. The white horse's two front hooves stepped forward heavily and stopped. Princess Taiping looked up at Yang Fan, who had been thrown into the air with a happy smile on her face. Qiu Shinji, Chu Kuanga, and Huzello also gathered around. Everyone's face was full of happy smiles. Jay stood on the side of the field, dumbfounded. The soldiers of the Tang dynasty cheered and kept jumping down from the stands. Intentionally or unintentionally, they brushed past him and knocked him over like a reed in the wind. Chapter 140. In the evening, Ma Chiao's house was bustling with noise and excitement. The doors were already closed, but many of the commoners did not immediately return to their homes. Ma Chiao's house was filled with people, and no one cared about the commotion. Because bad luck, Huaming Lei Basho and Su Mohan were also present, who would care about the ban? Su Fangjing's face was flushed, and he desperately raised his voice to drown out the noise in the room. "Hey! I told you! I told you! Luckily, I found a Taoist priest to set up an altar, and now our feng shui has improved. Look at Xiaofan and Brother Qiao. They've both become imperial guards." Auntie Hua laughed. Su Fangjing, come on. Brother Qiao has already said that it was thanks to the help of Master Shui from White Horse Temple that they had the opportunity to join the Imperial Guards. This is the monk's credit. What does it have to do with Taoist priests? Su Fangjing was unconvinced. Feng Shui is mysterious. You wouldn't understand even if I explained it to you. Tell me, how many messy things have happened in the past few days? If it wasn't for me, Basho, decisively inviting a Taoist priest to set up an altar and change the feng shui of our place, how could these two children have met a benefactor? Bad luck, Huaming Lei said with a smile. No matter what the reason is, it's a good thing that our children have become so successful. Ma Chiao's mother said, Brother Hua is right. No matter what, this is a joyous occasion. We have to thank everyone. Our Chiao has finally become successful. His grandfather will be happy in the underworld. Ma Chiao's mother couldn't help but wipe away her tears, and everyone saw this and comforted her. Many of the shopkeepers and Marquis Wu, who were familiar with Yang Fan and Ma Chiao, crowded around them, looking enviously at their heroic imperial army uniforms. Taking over Yang Fan's job, Xiao Qianyue, who had just become a shopkeeper not long ago, touched Yang Fan's and Ma Chiao's uniforms and asked curiously, "Xiao Fan, why is your uniform different from Brother Chiao Er's? What are your official positions in the imperial army?" Yang Fan said, "As long as a new recruit joins the army, they have to start from scratch. How can they immediately become an official? However, because I made a contribution to defeating the Tubo in the bow fencing competition, the Empress was very happy, so she made an exception and promoted me to be the chef." Xiao Qianyue continued, "I heard that the Imperial Guard has 16 guards. Which guard are you from?" Yang Fan said, "I'm currently in the Golden Guard, and Brother Chiao has chosen the Dragonmite Army. The Dragonmite Army is full of cavalry, and joining this guard, although I'm a soldier now, I have many opportunities to excel." Ma Chiao said loudly, "Brothers, don't worry. Xiao Fan has made our Xiu Wen workshop proud, and I, Ma Chiao, will not be inferior. After joining the army this time, I will definitely train hard in riding and archery, and in the future I will earn great military merits." The shopkeepers cheered Marquis Wu, wishing him to become a general as soon as possible. Ma Chiao's face was full of smiles, and he waved his hand frequently, as if he had already become a great general, looking very impressive. Jiang Suning came late, and after she closed up the stall, she busied herself for a while, mixing the noodles to be used the next morning and placing them on the Kong to wake up. Only then did she arrive at Ma Chiao's house. Before she entered the house, she saw that it was very lively, and even the courtyard was full of people. After she greeted each of her acquaintances one by one, she squeezed through the door and saw Ma Chiao excitedly talking about the bow fencing competition that day. At that time, Her Royal Highness passed the ball to Xiao Fan's horse, and Xiao Fan— "Ah, the princess? Of course, don't interrupt me. At that time, what was I talking about?" Jiang Suning listened and couldn't help but purse her lips into a smile. There was an extra lamp in the room, and the light could still be considered bright. Although the light was flickering because of the crowded crowd, it was still possible to clearly see his appearance. Ma Chiao was wearing a red battle jacket, a half-body leather armor, a leather helmet with curled ears, and a pair of yellow fat trousers, which were tightly tucked into his battle boots. Just this outfit alone showed a bit of heroic spirit. Looking at him carefully, he seemed to be a bit thinner and darker than before. However, the biggest change was not in his appearance, but something that seeped out from his bones. He was, as usual, boasting and showing off to his companions, but Jiang Suning could see that he had a different temperament than before. His eyes seemed to be a lot clearer, a lot brighter. There was a faint stubble on his chin, and he hadn't reached the age where he should grow a beard. He wasn't shaved cleanly, but because of this he had a bit of a mature man's aura. Jiang Suning's gaze slid over that moving chin, and then moved to his mouth. Suddenly her body heated up, and even the tips of her ears heated up. In the past, this was unimaginable. She saw Ma Chiao as a brother, but never as a man. Even when he held her hand or touched her body when they were fooling around, she didn't feel anything. But this time, thinking of how he suddenly turned around at the Lantern Festival and that kiss that caught her off guard, she actually felt a little embarrassed. That kiss wasn't beautiful, and the most she felt was pain. Her cut lips had been slightly swollen for more than a day, but that kiss had a great impact on her heart. Ma Chiao gestured as he spoke and turned his head in her direction. Jiang Suning's heart skipped a beat. She was actually a little afraid of being seen by him, so she hurriedly lowered her head and squeezed into the crowd beside her mother. It was late at night, and bad luck Huminglei had given special permission to delay the curfew by 2 hours. Now that the time was up, the guests all took their leave. Chiao, see Xiaoning and her son off. Because the two families had always been on good terms, Ma's mother and Pasta's mother chatted the longest. After seeing the other guests off, Ma's mother instructed her son to see them off. I'm a little tired, so I won't be going. Sister Ning, see you tomorrow. Yang Fan originally wanted to see them off, but when he saw Jiang Sining hiding half of his body behind his mother, which was quite different from his usual straightforward and generous self, he actually revealed a little shyness. Yang Fan's heart couldn't help but be moved. He originally wanted to say, "I'll go too," but at the last moment, he changed it to not going. Ma Chiao accompanied Jiang Sining and Jiang Sining's mother out together, and coincidentally saw Auntie Hua walking slowly. Auntie Hua's residence wasn't far from the Jiang family's house, so the two old sisters who had lived in the same place for their entire lives walked side by side, chatting as they walked. This time, Ma Chiao and Jiang Sining were left behind. Admittedly, Jiang Sining's heart was perturbed, and Ma Chiao also felt a little uneasy when he thought about what happened that night. The two of them walked side by side behind the two old people, their hearts beating lightly. They both lowered their heads to look at the frost-like ground, not knowing what to say. Sometimes they would tilt their heads slightly and secretly glance at the person next to them. If the other person also happened to look at them, they would quickly look away when their eyes met. That kind of feeling of bashfulness and timidity was something they had never experienced before, and it was difficult to understand what it was like for a moment. After turning a corner in front, they would arrive at the Jiang family's house. The Jiang family was the first house near the intersection. Pasta stopped and lowered his gaze. He said to Ma Chiao somewhat bashfully, "All right, you should also go back and rest. Tomorrow morning, you still have to report to the army. Don't be late." Then, I'll go back first. Ma Chiao stopped and heaved a sigh of relief as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. He tugged at the lapel of his military uniform and made a move to leave. Seeing his uneasy appearance, Jiang Sining couldn't help but purse his lips into a smile. He softly said, "You really do look a little like a human now. In the future, when you become a member of the Imperial Army, you can be considered to have jumped out of the small circle of the Showen workshop. Work hard, and in the future you can make contributions and become a great general. Then you can come back in style and let me see you." Ma Chiao laughed and said, "Become a great general? There are people who become great generals at a young age, but they are all the children of rich and powerful families. For people like us who come from humble and common families, unless we make an enormous contribution, even if we're lucky, by the time I become a great general, I'm afraid I'll be 70 or 80 years old. At that time, will you still come to see me?" Jiang Sining said, "If you come back, I'll go see you. What's wrong with being 70 or 80 years old? Unless you think I'm too ugly at that time." Ma Chiao blurted out, "How can that be? Even if you grow to 80 years old, little Ning will still be little Ning. You'll still be so good-looking." A faint blush appeared on Jiang Sining's face. She lightly spat and said, "Nonsense. Then wouldn't I be an old demon?" Looking at her shy and moving appearance, Ma Chiao suddenly had the urge to kiss her. Appearance is born from the heart. His impulse immediately leaked out from his eyes. Jiang Sining faintly sensed it. She slightly raised her head and slightly widened her eyes. Even she herself couldn't tell if the blurred light in her eyes was anticipation, surprise, or fear. Ma Chiao slightly lowered his head. "Little Ning, you!" Just at this moment, Annie Hua energetically appeared from around the corner. She saw Ma Chiao leaning over to kiss her, and Jiang Sining raising her head to welcome him. Ma Chiao and Jiang Sining quickly straightened their bodies. They looked at her in panic and said, "Auntie Hua, Little Ning, it's getting late. You should go back and rest. Auntie is going home now." Being old and shrewd, Auntie Hua was only slightly startled. She quickly returned to normal, as if she hadn't seen this scene at all. Jiang Sining blushed and responded. Auntie Hua then turned around and left. Just as she rounded the corner, Auntie Hua quickened her steps and quickly rushed back to the Jiang family's front door. She lowered her voice and called out, "Sister, sister, come out quickly." After Auntie Hua's interruption, Ma Chao and Jiang Sining only briefly chatted for a while before Jiang Sining ran back home as if escaping. Ma Chao walked all the way back. His heart was full of novelty. Before, he had never treated Jiang Sining as a woman, but now he couldn't help but think about her. He thought over and over again, Xiao Ning is actually very pretty, diligent, and capable. If I could really marry her and make her my wife. When he thought of that kiss, when he thought of Jiang Sining's thin and soft red lips, Ma Chao's entire body felt hot, and he actually felt as if he'd drunk wine, causing him to be extremely intoxicated. In the darkness of the night, a figure quietly stood in the corner of the wall. Seeing that Ma Chao had returned, the figure leaned against the wall again. Ma Chao didn't notice and stepped into the courtyard. Chapter 141. Yang Fan and Ma Chao were lying side by side on the same bed. Yang Fan's house had already been entrusted to Su Fangjing to find someone to resell it. However, there was originally nothing in the house. Now that the weather was cold, it was better to stay at home. It was better to stay at Ma's house to keep warm. Ma Chao rested his head on his arms and looked at the top of the tent. He said to Yang Fan, I have been diligently practicing the martial arts you taught me. Later, when I am familiar with this set of saber techniques, you will have to teach me some new ones. Yang Fan said, Of course, I am only afraid that you are not willing to work hard. As long as you are willing to learn, there is no reason for me not to teach you. Ma Chao thought for a moment and laughed. I still feel like I am in a dream. I never thought that I, Ma Chao, would have such a glorious day. Wearing these clothes, it is really awe-inspiring. Just now, did you see how envious those servants and Marquis Wu were when they looked at us? He suddenly turned over and looked at Yang Fan with bright eyes. Yang Fan said in surprise, Why are you looking at me like that? I am not your wife. Ma Chao sincerely said, Little Fan, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Yang Fan asked curiously, Thank me for what? Ma Chao said seriously, When I was a child, my mother told me the story of Mencius's mother moved 3 times. She said that an eagle living in a chicken coop will also lose the ability to soar in the sky. The kind of friend you make determines the kind of person you become. I am very happy to be friends with you, to be brothers. Yang Fan smiled and patted him on the shoulder without saying a word. Ma Chao said regretfully, But why did you let me stay in the Longwu army? It would be better for us brothers to be together. We can take care of each other. Yang Fan said, In the army, no matter how much seniority is valued, the most important thing is real ability. You know how Chu Dage was demoted from the army. The man he had crippled had a backer, but what happened in the end? We are brothers. If we stay together, it will be hard for us to take care of each other. You'll have more opportunities in the Dragon Guard than in the Golden Guards. Ma Chao nodded and said seriously, Yes. I don't want to rely on your care to climb up and let others stab me in the back. I just don't want to be separated from you. Don't worry, if I want to become an official, I will use my own ability to convince people. The faintly discernible figure quietly left the vicinity of the Ma family. This person was Tin Ano. After receiving her young master's order, she had a justifiable reason to pay attention to Yang Fan with peace of mind. She didn't expect that Yang Fan had become an imperial guard. She recalled that when she first met Yang Fan, he was just a worker. Then, in the blink of an eye, he had become the head of the White Horse Temple. Now he had become an imperial guard. This person's luck was truly beyond her imagination. He's just a small soldier in the imperial guard. I believe that young master won't take him seriously. Tin Ano pondered on whether she should report this matter to her young master. Years of obedience had become a habit, so she didn't want to hide anything from her young master. However, she instinctively wanted to protect Yang Fan. Suddenly, she saw a familiar place and couldn't help but stop. A moment later, she appeared in the small house that Yang Fan used to live in. The door opened and the cold moonlight shone into the room. Tin Ano silently scanned everything in the room and quietly walked in. The mouse in the corner was startled by her light footsteps and quickly crawled into its hole. Teneno lifted the dusty bedsheet and gently sat down on the couch. She hugged her knees with a gentle gaze. This place was shabby, and there was really nothing to look at. For a girl like her who was born in a wealthy family and was extremely particular about clothes and food, this was even more so for her. However, this place had an indescribable attraction to her. When she was here, her heart would feel incomparably peaceful and warm. Perhaps she had this feeling in her distant childhood. She had always refused to think of her childhood because once she thought of it, she would involuntarily recall that miserable period of time. However, during the days that she stayed at Yangfan's place, that relaxed, comfortable, natural, and unrestrained feeling was something that she had only experienced in her distant childhood. It was a feeling of home, a feeling of home. She couldn't describe the specific feeling, but there was a faint nostalgia and sadness. Teneno sighed softly and hugged her knees in loneliness. The guards of Jinwu were divided into the left and right guards of Jinwu. They were 2 of the 16 guards of the imperial army and were in charge of the emperor's imperial guards and retinue. The patrolling police in the palace and the capital, as well as matters of the Marquis of Feng, roads, and water, were all within their scope of responsibility. Yang Fan had originally planned on using the opportunity to enter the palace to get close to Shangguan Wan. However, he didn't know that an outsider like him had no chance to walk around the palace without anyone leading him. Every time he saw Shangguan Wan, it was in public and under the watchful eyes of everyone. There was no chance at all. Up until now, he hadn't made any progress on Shangguan Wan's side. In the end, Qiu Shinji, who he thought would be hard to get close to, had been accidentally sent to him by fate. However, the world was full of strange changes that were hard to imagine. Yang Fan had originally thought that he would be staying in the guards of Jinwu for a long time and that there would be opportunities to act. Therefore, after reporting to Meng Jin, he patiently familiarized himself with the surroundings and made friends with the soldiers in the army. He temporarily suppressed his murderous intent and wanted to completely assimilate into this environment to ensure that his identity would not be exposed when he returned to the Thornhill. However, just 3 days later, his superior, Captain Fu, informed him to immediately pack up and report to the palace in Luoyang. From that day onwards, he would become a Bighorn Man. The Bighorned Men were part of the guards of Jinwu. There were a total of 600 of them, and they were part of the Royal Guard of Honor. Usually, they wielded halberds and served as palace guards. However, during major court meetings and important royal ceremonies, they would hold large horns and blow horns, becoming a part of the royal instrumental band. Yang Fan didn't know why he was transferred to the palace again. He had just gotten close to Qiu Shinji and hadn't even warmed his seat when he was transferred away again. Fortunately, he was transferred to another place. Therefore, Yang Fan made a feint with Qiu Shinji and killed his way back into the palace. There had never been an imperial guard like Yang Fan who could cause such a huge commotion when he entered the palace. In reality, when he had first reported to Meng Jin, he had also caused a commotion in the imperial army of the guards of Jinwu. Bowing was one of the most popular sports in the army. An expert in bowing would be fanatically sought after by the soldiers. This time, Yang Fan had fought 5 against 10 and accompanied Princess Taiping in defeating the Tufan army. This attracted the intense attention of the imperial army. However, the attention he attracted in the imperial army was far less than the impact he had in the palace. This was because he had once defeated a sumo wrestler from Princess Taiping's residence, because he was the little whirlwind in the bowing arena. It was said that Lady Xiaoman was so angry that she stomped her feet, and Shangguan Shoujiao was so angry that he fell down, because he fought side by side with Princess Taiping and defeated the Tufan army. Most of the officers and soldiers of the guards of Jin had only heard about it through hearsay. They had vaguely heard about the grand occasion of that day's competition. Most of the palace maids, eunuchs, and guards were eyewitnesses. Therefore, the arrival of Yang Fan caused an even bigger commotion among them. Other than that, there was another important reason. Yang Fan was once the head monk of the White Horse Temple. Until now, his head was still bald and did not grow any hair. Everyone in the palace knew what kind of person the abbot of the White Horse Temple, Xuehuai, was. Therefore, Yang Fan, who was also from the White Horse Temple, also became a little erotic. A bald little monk, what a fresh feeling! This image and identity, compared to a guard or a scholar, had a different flavor. It was a fresh and exciting feeling. This kind of feeling could easily arouse the imagination of those girls who were deep in the palace and had nothing to do. "Io, Brother Yang, thank you so much. I slipped and—" The one who spoke was a cute little palace made of about 12 or 13 years old. Her surname was Shou, and she had a lovely name, Yuan Bao. At this time, gold and silver were not used as currency, and there was no such thing as Yuan Bao. But at this time, there was already the word Yuan Bao. Yuan Bao at this time referred to Kai Yuan Tong Bao. It seemed that Zhou Yuan Bao's parents were so poor that they gave their daughter such a name. In this era, girls could get married at the age of 15. Many girls who passed the age of 15 were already married. In order to ensure that the number of palace maids and beauties was sufficient, the age of the beauties in the palace was relatively young. They could enter the palace at the age of 11 or 12. Zhou Yuan Bao entered the palace at the age of 11 and had been in the palace for a year. It had just snowed heavily, and the world was covered in a vast expanse of white. Yang Fan, with snow on his shoulder, walked over from the opposite side with his halberd in his hand. Zhou Yuan Bao was walking towards him, and as soon as he saw him, he slipped and fell. There were 2 palace walls on both sides, and there were only the 2 of them in the middle. Should he help him up? Yang Fan went forward to help him up, and so the little girl hung on his arm. The snow was very white as the white flour. The snow was very soft as a sponge cake. So this fall did not hurt Lady Yuan Bao, nor did it dirty her clothes. But the little girl hung on Yang Fan's arm, looking a little unsteady. She said coquettishly, "Brother Yang, can you help me pat the snow off my body? I can't stand properly." She was sitting on the ground, so the snow was stuck to her dress. At this moment, she raised her little butt, raised her cute little face, and looked at Yang Fan with her big watery eyes. There was a mischievous smile in the bottom of her eyes. Of course, she knew that Yang Fan would not really dare to help her pat the snow off her dress. She just liked to see Yang Fan embarrassed. In a place with many men, even the most flamboyant women would calm down. But in a place with many women, they were practically unscrupulous. Yang Fan was a grown man, but from time to time he became the object of the little palace maid's teasing. The women in the lonely deep palace had another source of entertainment.